Transportation. At this time, can everybody please silence your cell phones? At this time and going forward, no one is to approach the dais. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Good morning and welcome to this hearing of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. I am Sylvina Brooks Powers, the chair of the committee. Today we will be voting on proposed intro number 346A, sponsored by Councilmember Mercedes Narcisse, a local law in relation to pedestrian crossing guidelines and right-of-way, and proposed intro number 746A, sponsored by Councilmember Oswald Felix, a local law in relation to the improvement of paved medians through the planting of vegetation or use in stormwater management. Proposed intro number 346A would permit pedestrians to legally cross a roadway at any point, including outside of a marked or unmarked crosswalk, and allow for crossing against traffic signals. It would legalize the activity commonly referred to as jaywalking, and specify that jaywalking does not constitute a violation of the law. This proposed bill also requires that the Department of Transportation conduct education and roads about their rights and responsibilities regarding street safety. Jaywalking is a rarely enforced violation in our city, yet jaywalking summons disproportionately target Black and Latino persons. There is little evidence to support the claim that criminal or civil offenses for jaywalking change pedestrian behavior or increase pedestrian safety. I am committed to street safety for all New Yorkers, and I'm pleased that this bill includes a public education campaign to ensure everyone on our roads stays safe. Giving less than 500 jaywalking summons a year almost exclusively to Black and Latino New Yorkers does not keep us safe. Thus, I support this proposed bill. Proposed intro number 746A would require the Commissioner of Transportation, the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation, and the Commissioner of Environmental Protection to modify at least 1 mile of vacant paved medians every 2 years. This bill prioritizes areas that have historically low infrastructure investment or a large population of low-income residents. These median modifications will include planted medians, tree beds, and other forms of stormwater management. These improvements have the potential to improve traffic safety, reduce the negative impacts of climate change, reduce the urban heat island effect, and beautify our neighborhoods. The Department of Transportation will also maintain a website identifying these medians and the agency responsible for cleaning and maintaining them. DOT will be the default agency due to their expertise in this infrastructure, but the mayor has the power to designate a different agency if appropriate. This is an important transparency measure so the public knows where the buck stops with respect to the cleanliness and integrity of our infrastructure. I will now allow Councilmember Narcisse to speak on her introduction.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you to my colleagues as well. I want to make it clear, as a registered nurse, I spent all my life talking about safety. This bill actually is addressing the issue that we face in the city of New York. And I want to say to my colleagues, please look into it and support Intro 346A. This bill designed to reform our approach to pedestrian crossing and decriminalize jaywalking in New York City. Our current jaywalking laws disproportionately impact communities of color. In just the first 3 months of this year, 96.5% of jaywalking tickets were issued to Black and Hispanic New Yorkers. This is a very clear indication of systemic bias in how these laws are enforced. Intro 346A seeks to correct this imbalance by allowing pedestrians to cross at any point while maintaining their safety. This legislation will remove the penalties associated with crossing outside of designated areas and provide a clearer guidelines for pedestrian signals, aligning our laws with the reality of our city's dynamic streets. This bill is about fairness, equity, and public safety. Like I said, it is very, very important for me. And all my time in a career as a nurse is to provide safety everywhere I am. This bill ensures that all New Yorkers can move freely and safely without fear of unjust penalties. I have never heard a New Yorker exclaim, I am so glad they caught that jaywalker. By removing the criminal penalties associated with jaywalking, we can redirect resources to more pressing public safety concerns. I urge all my colleagues, please support Intro 346A and join us in making our city a more just and equitable place for everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council Member. I will now ask the committee clerk to conduct. I will now ask the committee clerk to conduct a roll call vote on the legislation.
Good morning, William Martin, Committee Clerk. Roll call vote, Committee on Transportation Infrastructure. Proposed introductions 346A and 746A. Items are coupled. Chair Brooks Powers.
I vote aye, and congratulations to the bill sponsors.
Rivera. Lewis. De La Rosa. Thank you. Farias.
I vote aye on all.
Thank you. Narcisse.
I vote aye on all.
Thank you. Juan. Banks.
Aye on all, and congratulations to the sponsors.
Ariola.
I'd like to explain my vote. On Intro 346A, although I understand the impetus for this bill, and I do appreciate the educational portion that was amended and put in. I think that's important. I just think that the city has invested billions of dollars in taxpayer funding to improve pedestrian safety, to put countdown clocks out, to put speed reducing mechanisms in place. And the streets have never been more dangerous with bus lanes, bike lanes, scooters, and vehicles going, not paying attention to the speed reducers. And I think if we have people crossing, not in designated areas where they can remain safe, I think it becomes a public safety issue. Therefore, I am a no on 346A. On 746, although I think that in theory it sounds wonderful, we've all seen that the DOT doesn't have the capability of keeping what they have already clean. Also, with the median income portion of this bill, I think that my district would be exempt from any of these beautifications. Therefore, I am a no.
We have a vote of 6 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, no abstention. Both items have been adopted by the committee.
With that, this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.
Morning and welcome to the New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Transportation jointly with Economic Development. At this time, can everybody please silence your cell phones? If you wish to testify, please go up to the Sergeant at Arms desk to fill out a testimony slip. Written testimony can be emailed to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. At this time and going forward, no one is to approach the dais. I repeat, no one is to approach the dais. Thank you for your cooperation. Chairs, we are ready to begin.
Good morning. Today is September 10th, 2024. My name is Amanda Farias. I'm the Majority Leader of the New York City Council, and I have the privilege of chairing the Council's Committee on Economic Development. I would like to extend my thanks to my co-chair, Majority Whip, and Chair Selvina Brooks Powers, as well as the members of both committees for coming together to hold this hearing. We've been joined by Council members Ariola, Narcisse, Lewis, Banks, Bottcher, De La Rosa, and Aviles. I'd like to start off by saying that I enjoy the ferry. I ride it myself, recommend it to my constituents, and find it a convenient way to get from my district to Manhattan and other parts of the city. The purpose of today's hearing is to take a deep dive into New York City Ferry's finances and operations, and to better understand the progress made since our last oversight hearing in 2022. We want to examine the implementation of NYC Ferry Forward, assess the projected impact of the new discounted fare structure for students, and discuss the recent developments of Hornblower's contract in light of their bankruptcy. We would like to use this hearing as an opportunity to evaluate the progress made in addressing the concerns raised in the 2022 Comptroller's audit, particularly regarding financial transparency and cost reporting. We aim to understand how EDC plans to further expand and improve NYC Ferry service while ensuring fiscal responsibility. Specifically, we want to examine the contract with City Experiences and its implication for NYC's ferry operations and finances, ridership, reduce impact. Furthermore, we'll discuss the implementation and impact of Local Law 47 of 2023, which expanded the New York City Ferry discount program to include high school students. Local Law 47, which I sponsored, ensures that all of the city's public high school students are eligible for the same reduced price fare as seniors, disabled persons, and anyone eligible for fair fares. We're keen to hear about the program, its pilot, current implementation, and any challenges so far in its rollout since it took effect last week on September 1st. Currently, New York City Ferry includes 6 routes and 1 seasonal weekend shuttle with 38 ferries and 25 ferry landings. Since our last hearing, we've seen changes in ridership patterns, fare structures, and operational strategies. We're particularly interested in understanding how these changes have affected the system's financial sustainability and accessibility. EDC's current contract with City Experiences promised improvements in ridership experience and system transparency. We look forward to hearing about the progress made on these fronts and any challenges encountered, especially in light of the operator's bankruptcy. Additionally, we're here to discuss 3 pieces of legislation related to the New York City ferry system. Introduction 321, sponsored by Councilmember Moya, would require ferry service to Willets Point. Introduction 864, sponsored by Chair Brooks Powers, calls for a study on expanding service along the Rockaway Peninsula. Resolution 400, sponsored by Councilmember Holden, urges EDC to expand service to LaGuardia Airport. We hope to explore how these proposals align with EDC's current plans and the overall vision for NYC Ferry, including potential job creation and impacts on local businesses near ferry landings. Before I turn the floor over to Chair Brooks Powers, I'd like to acknowledge we've also been joined by Councilmember Wan, and I would like to take a minute to acknowledge the Economic Development Committee staff, Senior Counsel Alex Polinoff, Senior Policy Analyst William Hongach, and Finance Analyst Glenn Martelloni for all their hard work putting this hearing together. With that said, I will now turn it over to Chair Brooks Powers for her opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to this joint oversight hearing. My name, again, is Sylvina Brooks Powers. I'm the chair of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Today, I'm pleased to be with my colleague and fellow co-chair, Majority Leader Farias, to conduct this hearing on the New York City ferry system. In addition, as my co-chair stated, we will be hearing 4 pieces of legislation related to expanding ferry service. Intro number 321, sponsored by Councilmember Moya, would require the New York City Department of Transportation to provide regular ferry service from Willets Point in Queens to the borough of Manhattan. Intro number 864, sponsored by myself, would require a study and report on the expansion of ferry service along the Rockaway Peninsula. Proposed Reso number 400A, sponsored by Councilmember Holden, would call on the New York City Economic Development Corporation to expand NYC ferry service to LaGuardia Airport. And a pre-considered intro sponsored by Councilmember Brannan, which would require a study and report on the feasibility of direct ferry service to Coney Island. In 2015, the then New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced plans to create a citywide ferry system within New York City that would match the cost of the city's buses and subways. In 2017, the de Blasio administration launched the New York City ferry system. Since then, the ferry system has been an innovative and efficient way to utilize New York City's waterways and coastlines for mass transit, particularly for those who live in isolated areas of transportation deserts. The New York City ferry system has 6 routes that span over 60 nautical miles of waterways within New York City and now carries millions of riders annually. The system also includes a number of discounted ticket options for senior citizens, students, persons with disabilities, and low-income riders. Although the New York City ferry system has proven to be an important mode of transit on our waterways, I have some fundamental concerns. Since its launch, New York City Ferry has been criticized for heavily subsidizing its rides. A 2019 report issued by the Citizens Budget Commission estimated that the city subsidizes the ferry system at a rate of $10.73 per ride, which was 10 times higher than the subsidies for subway or bus rides. In addition, the City Comptroller's Office found in a 2022 report that the net losses of the ferry operations were $30 million in fiscal year 2017, $44 million in fiscal year 2018, $53 million in fiscal year 2019, $53 million in fiscal year 2020, and $33 million in fiscal year 2021. The Comptroller's audit also found that EDC had failed to disclose over $224 million in New York City ferry expenditures, and that the agency had significantly understated public subsidies for the ferry system. In addition to cost-effectiveness concerns, a 2021 ferry survey conducted by EDC found that only 32% of ferry riders were BIPOC, and that the median income of all riders were between $100,000 and $149,000. These findings revealed that our ferries were not serving all New Yorkers equitably. I am pleased that based on EDC's 2023 ferry service, we are seeing some improvement in terms of diverse ridership. For example, in 2023, frequent riders who used the ferry 3 or more days per week were a more diverse group than non-frequent riders. 44% of frequent riders are BIPOC, while just 30% of infrequent riders are BIPOC. In addition, the 2023 survey shows that 35% of all riders system-wide are BIPOC. Nevertheless, the median household income for riders remains at $100,000 to $149,000. While there has been some progress in terms of inclusive and equitable ridership, there is still more work to do. Today, I am looking forward to hearing from the administration on their ongoing efforts to make the ferry system more equitable, fiscally sound, and environmentally sustainable for New Yorkers. I'm also looking forward to hearing the administration's plans regarding further expansion of the ferry system, particularly focusing on the legislation being heard, safeguards against further fiscal management issues, implementation of the New York City Ferry Forward Plan, and more. Before we begin, I would like to thank my staff and committee staff for their hard work. Kevin Katowski, Senior Policy Analyst, John Basile, Senior Policy Analyst, Mark Chen, Senior Counsel to the Committee, Connor Mealy, Counsel to the Committee, Adrian Drapal, Senior Policy Analyst, Julian Martin, my Policy and Budget Director, and Renee Taylor, my Chief of Staff. I will now turn it back over to my co-chair, Majority Leader Farias.
I'll now kick it over to Committee Counsel to swear in the folks from EDC and DOT.
Good morning. Alex Polinoff, Senior Counsel. Will all members of the administration testifying today please raise your right hands? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony today and to respond honestly to council member questions? Great. You may begin when ready.
Good morning, Chairs Farias and Brooks Powers, and members of the Economic Development and Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. My name is James Wong, and I serve as an Executive Vice President for the New York City Economic Development Corporation and as Executive Director of NYC Ferry. I'm joined by my colleagues Franny Civitano, Deputy Director from the NYC Ferry team, and Michelle Lamberti, Vice President of Legislative Affairs in our Government and Community Relations Department, along with Ricardo Rodriguez, Assistant Commissioner of Intergovernmental Affairs at the New York City Department of Transportation. The New York City Economic Development Corporation works to create a vibrant, inclusive, and globally competitive economy for all New Yorkers. Our work is guided by 4 strategic priorities: strengthening business confidence, growing innovation industries with a focus on equity, building neighborhoods as places to live, learn, work, and play, and delivering sustainable infrastructure. As part of this mission, EDC oversees the city's passenger ferry system, NYC Ferry, which provides New Yorkers and visitors alike with a convenient and affordable transit option connecting communities to jobs, recreation, and each other. The NYC Ferry system provides more than 7 million riders annually with safe, dependable, affordable, and accessible transit across the 5 boroughs. With 6 routes that touch every borough, 25 landings, and 38 vessels, the system spans over 70 nautical miles and is the largest passenger-only fleet in the nation based on hours of service and fleet size. We value the Council's partnership and support of NYC Ferry, and thank you for the opportunity to testify about our work. In 2022, Mayor Adams and EDC unveiled NYC Ferry Forward, a plan to make NYC Ferry more equitable, accessible, and fiscally sustainable citywide. The plan's main strategies included an expanded discount program for NYC Ferry, expanded outreach to NYCHA residents, easier access for New Yorkers who will be taking bicycles onto ferries, a competitive procurement process for a new ferry operating contract, increased public engagement to improve equity, and creative opportunities for revenue generation to improve financial sustainability. NYC Ferry is pleased to now provide a brief update on the plan's implementation to date. In the 2 years since the NYC Ferry Forward plan was announced, the program has successfully introduced and expanded the discount program to make NYC Ferry more accessible to New Yorkers. The NYC Ferry discount program offers reduced fare rides for seniors and people with disabilities. Additionally, any rider that participates in Fair Fares NYC, a program supporting low-income residents, is also eligible for the NYC Ferry discount program. Since the program's expansion in 2022, nearly 18,000 New Yorkers have enrolled, and we've seen a 600% increase in the use of discounted tickets since we introduced the single-trip discount option. Our fare analysis has shown that lowering the upfront cost of participating in the discount program and introducing a 10-trip pack has led to increased trip frequency among our returning customers, including minority and discount riders. The student discount program has been a critical component of our equity and accessibility efforts and expanded discount program. Before I go any further, I want to take this opportunity to public thank you, Chair Farias, for your leadership and commitment to NYC Ferry. We greatly appreciate your collaboration on a variety of issues, most notably expanding NYC Ferry's discount program to include New York City's high school students. We are excited about this program and have been promoting this new affordable weekday commuting option to high schoolers living or going to school near the New York City waterfront. Since enrollment in the program opened on August 1st, 2024, NYC Ferry has worked diligently to make students and their families aware of the program. To date, 535 students have registered for the program, and over 400 student discount tickets have been purchased since the program went live just last week. We have implemented an extensive engagement strategy to boost participation. Just last week, NYC Ferry was pleased to join Chair Farias and her team and New York City high schoolers at the Soundview Landing for an NYC Ferry student discount launch event. We appreciate Council's enthusiasm and support and look forward to enrolling students for whom the ferry is a convenient means of transportation to and from school. Additionally, to advance this effort, in the month of August alone, NYC Ferry held 11 in-person tabling events about the student discount program across New York, including at Councilmember Rivera's office, libraries, and CBO back-to-school events. We are happy to partner with the Council on future events and activities to help spread the word to our young constituents and their families. These events are in addition to NYC Ferry canvassing around our landings to provide information to local communities about the ferry system. In August, NYC Ferry canvassed in 15 neighborhoods, sharing information on the discount program. These efforts have been bolstered by our promotion of the program across NYC Ferry's social media channels. There are nearly 50 public, private, and charter schools within a half mile of an NYC Ferry landing, and we have begun outreach for tabling and presentation opportunities to reach eligible students. To further these efforts, we have worked collaboratively with our colleagues at the Department of Education to reach students and families. We've ensured that each parent of an eligible student received a banner message in their New York City Schools account portal notifying them of their child's eligibility for the program. We posted flyers on how to apply for the program in 10 different languages on the DOE webpage and pushed out an email blast on the program to all New York City high school parents. As the school year begins, we look forward to increased engagement with high schools, local community education councils, and school-based parent organizations, and will continue exploring additional avenues of engagement to promote this student discount program. To expand our ridership base to be more racially and economically diverse, NYC Ferry has developed a robust community outreach campaign. In the last year, NYC Ferry's community outreach teams engaged over 19,000 New Yorkers through 100 canvassing sessions, 20 career fairs, and almost 200 presentations, sponsorships, and tabling events. As part of our new operating agreement with Hornblower, NYC Ferry now has a full-time employee solely dedicated to NYCHA outreach, including meetings with tenants associations and residents, promoting NYC Ferry at family days, and other NYCHA-related events, canvassing at and near developments, promoting NYC Ferry as a service and as a career opportunity, and volunteering with tenant associations and related organizations. To reduce impediments for New Yorkers looking to take their bicycles on the ferry, NYC Ferry eliminated the $1 bike fee in September of 2022. While bike capacity is still limited on vessels, we instituted this change to better connect NYC Ferry with other environmentally sustainable modes of transit and encourage ridership among New Yorkers who want to use bicycles as a last-mile transportation option. When we last testified before your committees in September 2022, we had just released an RFP for a new ferry operator. After a successful and highly competitive process, we entered into a new 5-year operating agreement with Hornblower in October 2023, a major achievement for the system. The new contract includes major business improvements, including a framework to partner with a corporate name sponsor to rebrand the system and further drive down the subsidy, upgraded ridership experiences like free onboard Wi-Fi, and behind-the-scenes system upgrades to increase transparency and efficiency. The contract has an initial 5-year term with 2 3-year expansion options, furthering the system to remain a permanent fixture of the New York City landscape. NYC Ferry has undertaken an expanded public information campaign through digital and in-person outreach to familiarize New Yorkers with the benefits of the system and encourage them to experience and ride NYC Ferry. In addition to our community engagement efforts, a key strategy for this has been our social media outreach. We've seen NYC Ferry brand engagement grow with creative and sometimes viral social media moments. NYC Ferry's social media engagement has grown organically with an over 500% year-over-year social media growth without spending any money on ads. NYC Ferry has successfully implemented creative revenue generation to improve the system's financial stability. NYC Ferry has been committed to creatively engaging advertisers and passengers alike, improving the ridership experience and generating positive financial returns to the system. In just the past year, NYC Ferry launched exciting new partnerships and activations to generate additional revenue and engage audiences, including a collaboration with Spotify, partnering with the Harry Potter play for Hogwarts-branded ferries, and a collaboration with Gay Pride Apparel for a capsule collection of merchandise for Pride Month. We've also opened up advertising space on digital tickets via our app, opening an additional advertising market to the over 2 million people who have the NYC Ferry app. To further boost revenue this summer, EDC released an RFP to find a sponsorship agency that can help NYC Ferry secure a naming rights and sponsorship partner that we hope will lead to a multi-million-dollar deal for NYC Ferry, helping to reduce the system's overall operating costs. As part of NYC Ferry's new operating agreement with Hornblower, we've rolled out a series of rider improvements, many of which make system information more accessible to riders, including expanded language access in the NYC Ferry app and on the NYC Ferry website, automated onboard audio and visual announcements to expand rider accessibility and alerting riders of the next stop, free Wi-Fi across all NYC Ferry vessels, the ability to text or call to get real-time schedule information for each ferry landing, in-app views of real-time seat and bike spot availability for every vessel. EDC and NYC Ferry are dedicated to improving the long-term financial sustainability of the system. Increased ridership supported by improved rider experience and additional revenue opportunities have driven down the system's per-passenger subsidy. NYC Ferry has the lowest subsidy of any publicly funded passenger ferry system in the country. In fiscal year 23, NYC Ferry saw its lowest per-passenger subsidy at $8.55, down 30% from its peak. We have reduced the cost of the ferry system and have improved our efficiency per hour and per rider as a system. Of the major transit systems in the New York City region, NYC Ferry has the third lowest subsidy behind MTA's local bus and subway system, ahead of the Long Island Railroad, commuter and express buses, and Metro North. And it is the only transit system to lower its passenger subsidy since the pandemic. To continue the growth of NYC Ferry ridership while also remaining sound financial stewards of the system, NYC Ferry announced a new fare policy in August, which went into effect yesterday. Under the new fare policy, there's a modest increase in the single-ticket base fare from $4 to $4.50, and a slight increase to the 10-trip pack and discount tickets to match MTA, subway, and bus per-trip fares at $2.90. In this fare structure, tourists and occasional riders pay a little bit more, while the 10-trip pack and discounted fares remain accessible to our frequent riders. NYC Ferry is dedicated to not just making its system more equitable and accessible to riders, but also driving employment in the maritime industry and serving as a critical component of the city's maritime employment pipeline. As of June 2024, NYC Ferry employed 450 individuals, 75% of whom are people of color and 21% of whom are women or gender nonconforming. More than 90% of employees are New York City residents. One of the reasons Hornblower was selected as our operator in 2023 is their commitment to nurturing maritime careers. Hornblower invests in their employees, providing job growth opportunities and creating good jobs that have competitive salaries and benefits to similar outfits in the harbor. They are also deeply committed to internal promotions and career growth. More than half of our currently trained and licensed captains started as deckhands. In 2024, NYC Ferry completed the first ever NYC Ferry Career Fair in partnership with NYCHA, and this fall we are launching our first ever apprenticeship program to attract more talent to careers in maritime. We are excited to continue and broaden these initiatives to bring more New Yorkers into the maritime industry. One of our key strategies of the Ferry Forward plan was to drive ridership by improving our operations and service. We are proud to say that NYC Ferry has continuously hit ridership records over the past year with over 7 million riders in fiscal year 24, an 8% increase in ridership from the prior fiscal year. And those who rely on NYC Ferry the most, our 5-day-a-week riders, are 47% non-white. Since 2022, NYC Ferry has worked to enhance the NYC Ferry experience during peak seasons by introducing new services such as the Rockaway Rocket, Rockaway Reserve, and South Brooklyn's Faster Connections. This past summer, ridership has been particularly robust with the return of the Rockaway Reserve and the launch of the Rockaway Rocket from Greenpoint and Long Island City. NYC Ferry set summer ridership records across the system with more than 3.1 million boardings between Memorial Day and Labor Day, a 7% increase from summer of 23. Summer weekend travel to Rockaway Beach remains popular, and premium ticketing programs brought additional revenue back into the system. In July alone, the Rockaway Reserve and Rocket generated approximately over $300,000 in revenue back to the system. We will have data on August ridership and revenue in the coming days and expect these numbers to be consistent, if not higher. As you've heard today, NYC Ferry is always looking for ways to improve the system. We have been focused on shoring up the NYC Ferry system by increasing ridership, driving fare box revenue, making our operations more efficient, and finding ways to ensure fiscal sustainability. While we do not currently have plans for expansion, we greatly appreciate the enthusiasm and interest in the system, and we continue to look for ways to optimize our system, such as through improved schedules and route configurations to efficiently and quickly get riders to their destinations. With respect to Introduction 321 and the proposed expansion of ferry service to Willets Point, as I just outlined, NYC Ferry does not have any current plans for system expansion. However, as part of the comprehensive Willets Point development process, EDC committed to the Queensborough president that we would undertake a study to evaluate a potential landing at this site. With respect to Introduction 864 and its proposed study and report on the expansion of ferry service along the Rockaway Peninsula, EDC has previously evaluated the expansion of ferry service to this area and has determined that system expansion further into the Rockaways was not viable for NYC Ferry. NYC Ferry vessels are unable to safely and reliably pass under the A-train bridge that crosses Broad Channel, as there is insufficient clearance. While the swing bridge could open for marine traffic, this would significantly disrupt subway service to the Rockaways. As for alternative ferry sites on the ocean side of the peninsula, such locations cannot be safely utilized as they are extremely challenging to water depths, high winds, and ocean swells. With respect to pre-considered legislation 2438, seeking a study and report on the feasibility of a direct ferry to Coney Island, EDC conducted significant work related to Coney Island ferry service. In 2019, we began work to launch a Coney Island route, but in late 2021, EDC paused work on its Coney Island Creek ferry landing due to navigational and safety concerns related to sand buildup in the creek. In 2022, we conducted a feasibility analysis to assess other landing options to serve Coney Island. For any proposed ferry landings on the ocean-facing shoreline, there are serious concerns that exposure to ocean swells and strong southeast winds would make any service unreliable, as a landing there would be inoperable under many weather and ocean conditions. Although protection could be provided by an offshore wave attenuating structure, such a project had projected capital costs that were estimated to be as high as $250 million. After an exhaustive look at different location options for a Coney Island ferry landing, we could not find an operationally reliable or financially responsible location to deliver the service. Finally, with respect to Resolution 400, proposing ferry service to LaGuardia Airport, EDC and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey both previously studied the viability of a ferry landing at the airport. In 2023, the Port Authority study, to which EDC and NYC Ferry contributed data, did not recommend the ferry option service at Bowery Bay or Flushing Bay, as the study concluded that both sites would attract a very low level of ridership and were not an effective means of transportation to the airport. EDC has previously stated that any considerations for airport service would need to be considered at market rate costs, but even then, the finances are unlikely to pencil out. In closing, we are very proud of our work to implement Mayor Adams' NYC Ferry Forward Plan and are excited to continue to provide a safe, affordable, and accessible transit system to New Yorkers. We welcome the opportunity to work with the Council and all partners to further advance the accessibility and fiscal sustainability of the system. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My team and I are happy to answer any questions you may have related to NYC Ferry.
Thank you so much for your testimony this morning and all the great responses that's within it. Bless you. I'd like to acknowledge Councilmember Vernikoff has joined us. Just to start off, I know you gave us the vessel counts. Do we still own all of our ferries that are currently in the fleet? And are there any additions on the routes that we have that we do not own?
NYC Ferry has 38 purpose-built vessels that EDC owns, and there are, I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
So we only have 38
Correct.
And we own them all?
We only have 38 vessels.
Okay, great. And all of those, are they all fully operational on a daily basis?
On any given day, there are vessels that are under maintenance, there are vessels that are being used for training and different things. There are no current sort of extended or long-term outages that would prevent a vessel from being used.
Okay, and do we happen to know how many on a daily basis are operational? Maybe, is it usually 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 are getting maintenance and?
At our peak in the summer, we use up to 27 vessels in maximum service. So at any given point, you might see 27 vessels out there. This allows us to have a spare ratio, so if something does happen, we are able to address that, and also allows for regular maintenance and upkeep.
Great, thank you. And can you give us the total capacity of passengers that each of the vessels can carry on a daily basis?
We have 2 classes of vessels. Subchapter T vessels hold 150 passengers, and our Subchapter K vessels hold up to 350 passengers.
Okay, and do you folks happen to have the breakdown of the current number of daily, weekly, weekends, and annual ridership totals across the NYC ferry system?
Not off the top of my head now, but we can certainly send that over.
Yeah, if you can send that, that would be great. Do you folks happen to have on average the amount of people with bikes who use the NYC ferry system on daily, weekly, or weekend, annual basis?
We don't track bikes right now individually. There are about 8 to 10 bike slots available on board. So we see those. Oh, thank you. Oh, great, perfect.
Okay, great.
Yep.
And you explained a little bit about how has ridership trended over the since our last 2022 hearing on the ferries. Do you happen to have, I know you gave us an annual percentage, but do you know by the last 2 years if we've seen an increase? I know we just have annual.
It was about 8% from 22 to 23, and about between 7 and 8% from 23 to 24
Okay,
for
so pretty
fiscal years.
consistent increasing.
So, yeah,
doubling.
I think since we've sort of gotten to the tail end of COVID, we've seen a more consistent growth rate.
Sorry.
Sure.
From fiscal year 22 to 23, it's a 23% growth, and that was kind of the remnants of COVID coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And from fiscal year 23 to 24, that's where the 7 to 8% growth happened.
Great, thank you. And could you folks provide the committee with a detailed summary of the 2023 ferry survey results? What were the biggest complaints, concerns expressed by riders? And how did you folks potentially address, either yourself at EDC or the NYC Ferry folks, address the customer complaints or concerns?
So in our annual survey, we give people an opportunity at the end to leave any kind of comment that they want. A lot of that is, we love the ferry, you know, we want to see more of it. Sometimes we get feedback, but mostly complaints or questions come in through the NYC Ferry website or email address, and those are handled by our operator as their function in managing customer service. They are very fast at getting back to people, so usually within 48 hours. We get a range of different things. People have questions or complaints about the schedule,
Can I ask?
the app,
Are we aggregating those complaints in a way, categorizing them, and kind of looking at a given point throughout the year, how do we address some of those concerns and to check in to see if they're larger?
I would say that the thing that we are tracking a little bit more closely than individual complaints is that actually through the new contract, we have a customer service score that the operator is held to and has to achieve certain targets in order to maintain their ability to receive certain payments. So the operator is really held to high standards, and it is revealed through customer response surveys that people do after they ride.
And do we know if we're seeing any large trends or any larger trends throughout either the complaints or the surveys that we're taking?
We certainly have, buckets of complaints or questions that come in by topic, and so we see what percentages those are. I would say that largely the trends that we see are often related to service. So, for example, I think it was maybe last year, we were seeing that the sound, PM ridership on the Soundview route was really picking up. And so there were people who were not able to get on the boat at 34th Street, so we would hear a lot about a specific departure time.
That was just my mom complaining.
Yes, yeah. We love your mom. But what we were able to do with that is we were able to take all those complaints and then look at the actual ridership and say, all right, we need to program this vessel to be a 299 capacity boat instead of a 150.
Got
So
it.
we were able to address it that way. So that's usually what we do with the trends we see.
That's really helpful to understand, and I will tell my mom that the vessel is bigger. And then in regards to the fleet purchase option, at a previous hearing in 2022, we got that the cost was around 235 million. Have we looked at adding any additional ferries down the line and what that cost would be?
No, we have not looked into additional vessel purchases.
Okay. And could you speak a little bit to how the expansion of the ferry fleet benefited service? Obviously, you just gave a great example of having different size, capacity of the fleet, and if at all that's added to the improved route times and services that we have throughout the ferry landings.
Sure. So having the two sizes of vessels and some vessels that have slightly stronger engines than others gives us a lot of flexibility to ensure that we're able to operate in all weather conditions and using the right size vessels. So for example, a stronger vessel that holds 150 passengers is probably well suited to go to the Rockaways in the winter because you have to cover a lot more open water. Whereas larger vessels, like 350 passenger vessels, which we do use on a variety of routes, including in Soundview, are ones that just, maybe they're coming less frequently, but they have a much higher capacity to make sure that we can bring people into the city per their demand.
Okay. So we all love to talk about ferry fleet expansion, even though in your testimony you have made clear that there is no call for expansion from the EDC's end at this moment. The Citizen Budget Commission recently recommended considering a reduction in service in the highest subsidized routes. Which NYC ferry routes receive the highest subsidy, if you folks have that on hand?
So we look at the system really holistically, and we are not often breaking things down at a subsidy per route level because the main thing that we're really focused on is making sure that we're supporting communities, and it is very possible that there are places where there's high value but maybe not quite as high ridership to individuals, and so we want to make sure that we are supporting New Yorkers even if they happen to live further away. So for us, as we think about the full system, we are making sure that we are doing so with all of our any sort of routing options or schedule changes and trying to make sure that we're doing it equitably to make sure that people are getting the service that they need.
Great, and I'm gonna ask her for the sake of the record, but it sounds like I already know the answer. Is reducing service on highly subsidized routes something EDC would consider?
We are not considering reductions in service strictly due to the subsidy of a specific route.
And is there any plan to expand to LaGuardia Airport? In the 2022 hearing we held, EDC mentioned that this would be explored as a market rate route.
We did put into the RFP some considerations around LaGuardia, and ultimately when we entered into negotiations and final contract, that's not something that we took through to the end. I would defer primarily to the Port Authority's perspective on this, which does influence how we've looked at things, because their study has shown was that it was not the most effective way to get people to and from the airport.
And what are the current ridership statistics for the seasonal ferries around Governor's Island and Rockaway Rocket?
I don't have Governor's Island. We can get back to you on that. We do know that that is a very productive route, the shuttle that goes back and forth. For the Rockaway Reserve, which is part of the Rockaway route, but is a higher fare, we saw 37,000 tickets that were sold from Memorial Day to Labor Day, which generated $370,000. And the Rockaway Rocket from July 20th to Labor Day sold over 10,000 tickets and generated over $100,000 in revenue. So we think of those as two very successful programs.
Do you folks happen to have the number of riders that utilized the ferry service during that time period in total?
Over this summer, we carried about 3.1 million riders.
On each of, well, at least.
Oh, sorry, that was system-wide.
System-wide.
Yeah. We can get back to you certainly with more specifics on those two routes and for the summer.
That'd be great, thank you. And are there any similar express ferries in the works for any other areas in the city?
There's no current plan for a new, a new version of the Rockaway rocket. We saw what we did this year, which was a slight change and was proven very successful. We will consider whether we need to make additional tweaks to services like that. The value of the South Brooklyn Faster Connections, which is something that we started a couple of years back, which allows for certain stops to be skipped in the AM peak so that we can get people from Bay Ridge or other places into the city faster to get to work, has proven to drive ridership from those locations. So it is a model that we do like to look at and will continue to look at in the future.
Great. And can you provide an update on the RFP that should have started October 1st of 2023? We know that the RFP was given to Hornblower, which filed for bankruptcy earlier this year, as you mentioned in your testimony, and we've come to a conclusion on a rebrand and renaming of the operations. Have there been any challenges or problems with the new contract, with city experiences, and how has that, if at all, impacted any service?
So the Hornblowers did go through a Chapter 11 restructuring, which wrapped up in July of this year. There was no impact to NYC Ferry operations or finances in connection with that, with their restructuring. I think one of the most important things to draw on as part of this is that through the procurement that we did last year, that resulted in Hornblower getting this contract, we instituted a number of elements in that contract that really helped protect the city and ensure that all of the policy decisions remained with the city. So fare setting, service destinations, the schedules, the routes, how often ferries go places, all of that is retained of control within the city. And the fare box revenue, importantly, is also taken by the city. So we really have a lot more control, which means that through their restructuring, there was zero impact to any service that we had.
That's great. Thank you for that. Can you explain how concession and advertising agreements are currently handled under the new terms of the RFP?
Yes, I can. So in our old contract, EDC didn't get any revenue from advertising or concessions, and so that was a really big thing we wanted to address in this new contract. Hornblower is able to, and sells on our behalf, onboard traditional kind of onboard advertising, which is the electronic screens, and also what we call activations. So that's like when Sleepy Time Tea wants to come in and give out tea to riders, that kind of thing. Also film and television and photo shoot revenue, if we ever did merchandising, things like that. So EDC gets 33% of gross revenue from onboard advertising and activations, 1.9% gross from concessions, which is generally a very small margin endeavor anyway, 55% of film and television. So we are very pleased that so far, we've generated well over $200,000 this year in advertising, and we expect that program to grow going forward.
That's great. We've definitely seen different rollouts of advertising or partnerships. Are those similar? Like, for example, and I recently stated this is why it's top of mind, like the Teletubbies were on the ferry. And so how does that work with what we're choosing to partner with in terms of maybe a sponsorship or an advertisement, or maybe something that the city is working on locally and having that kind of partner on our ferry and promoting it on our social media?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of really creative things. I also just saw the Beetlejuice thing.
Right, yes, the Beetlejuice thing is happening.
Having just seen that movie. Yes, so a lot of that is, one, how can we get those brands to promote NYC Ferry?
Sure.
Because bringing eyes to the system is also really important in helping encourage tourism, grow followers, things like that. And so I think that they are looking at it a lot from how can this brand support NYC Ferry as well. And hopefully it's a good, interesting partnership that engages people. We're also seeing, Hornblower, I think they have a workshop coming up or a seminar later this month that's specific to local businesses. So they know that, you know, it's great to get the businesses that have the really big checks, but they also want to support small businesses in advertising. So there are discounted rates that, you know, local businesses can use to do that, and other ways that they will engage and support with those types.
So each of the cross-promotion opportunities are definitely attached to like some sort of advertising contract?
That's a question I don't know the answer to.
Okay.
We could get back to you on that.
Sure.
But I guess I'll just say a major priority through their program is to create a revenue stream. There are occasionally times where there's sort of an in-kind transfer, but primarily we are encouraging them to look at revenue generating opportunities.
Right. Okay, and are there any technological improvements being considered in the new RFP, such as mobile ticketing enhancements or real-time tracking systems?
Yes, so we've started to roll out a lot of great feature upgrades that riders are starting to see out in the world, and we're really excited about that. So when people are able to log on with Wi-Fi on board vessels, like that is a huge upgrade, particularly if you're on a longer commute that takes you all the way out to the Rockaways or to St. George or to the Bronx. So things like that are really important. Also, we are beginning the rollout of technology that actually allows you to know about how many seats are available on a vessel. If you are a morning commuter and you are making a decision about whether or not you should go towards the water to get on this vessel, or if you should walk another direction, knowing about how many seats are on board is a really important aspect that we've been really pushing. So that is just starting to roll out, and we see that these technologies are really going to be great advantages in the future.
That sounds like a wonderful enhancement for those folks that you don't want to end up on the opposite end and not having a boat there or a seat there. So that's appreciated. I'd like to also acknowledge we've been joined by council members Brannon, Salamanca, and Gutierrez. How is the EDC working to integrate NYC Ferry with the other public transportation options in the city, such as buses, subways, or like in my district, the e-scooters?
So I think that a lot of what we have focused on has been making sure that where there are services that are nearby, that we do whatever we can to make it as easy for people to use multiple things as possible. So as we saw when we were standing up there at Classen Point, yes, those scooters are right there. We also had a bus that came in and made the loop, and that was something that EDC actually worked with the MTA on to make sure that a bus wasn't stopping 4 blocks away, but actually came into the park and made that loop, which makes it a lot easier for customers to make connections like that.
And how has the ferry system impacted local businesses near the ferry landings? Have there been any adverse effects on commercial rent prices? Are we tracking any or analyzing any data like that?
We don't track that type of data. I think, you know, we have a lot of anecdotal stories of ways that especially Hornblower has worked to build out a community outreach program, support and promote local businesses. We hear from them like, oh, we love the ferry, you know, we want people to come from the ferry to our businesses, but we don't have really specific analysis.
Okay. Nearly 2 years have passed since the new fare structure was implemented. Has ridership increased or decreased during that time?
We are happy to say it has increased, yes.
And how has the administration publicized the new fare structure since 2022, particularly the discounts that are offered to seniors, people with disabilities, and other low-income riders?
Thank you. Yes, the discount program has been one of my favorite things to talk about. Since we made the change in 2022, I think we eliminated a fairly convoluted program that was the discount program before. Before the 2022 change, you could only get half off of a monthly pass, so you had to spend $60, and you know, hopefully you took it enough in that month to make it worth it. Now there's the one-way ticket available. So since that change especially, we've seen a 600% increase in the use of discount tickets. So I think we've really made it more accessible to use. We're excited that, you know, now folks who are in the Fair Fares program can also, and then of course the high school students, which we're already seeing a pretty good uptake for it just being, you know, 10 days into the program so far.
Great. And do we know, pardon, how many seniors, persons with disabilities, and other low-income riders have applied for discounts?
We have nearly 18,000
Right.
people total in the discount program. I don't have the breakdown off the top of my head.
Okay. Is there any intention for us to track it in that way and break it down? Do we
We
have that
can.
ability?
Yeah.
Okay. And do we have the total number? I know you broke it down into two of how many high school students take the ferry as part of the program.
When we do our annual surveys, we do ask people about age. We have like an age bucket. We don't specifically, or we haven't specifically asked about high school or student status. And I would imagine that high schoolers are not the people who are going to want to volunteer to take a demographic survey. But so far, we have over 500 students who have signed up, 400 tickets that have already been purchased. And then Hornblower is starting very specific outreach. There are about 50 schools, charter, private, and public, that are within a half mile of our landings. There are an estimated around 20,000 high school students that live near landings. So we're really hoping to find the folks that live and go to school. That's the connection that's going to be most helpful. So I think as we are truly in this program now, we expect that 500 number to grow.
And can you kind of explain how the pilot was created with DOE, its success with the Harbor School students, and any other additional details you'd like to share?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your guidance on this program in general. With the Harbor School pilot really was born out of, we knew we had this big citywide rollout. There are nearly 400,000 high school students in New York City. We knew that that was a very large scale. So giving ourselves the opportunity to work with Harbor School, which is obviously in a very particular geographic situation, they have to get on a ferry to get to the school. We worked with them for about a year and a half, offered them the opportunity to apply, and we saw about 1/4 of their students took advantage of that and used NYC Ferry, or at least were enrolled in the program. For the last about 9 months or so, we've been working weekly with DOE to make sure that this rollout is successful. So it's all over their website. We've got flyers in 10 different languages. They've been emailing parents and guardians. We will continue to, hit that drumbeat, and as we also do our own outreach.
And I'll just add one other thing to that is, in terms of like the learnings from that pilot, we were sort of dealing with the Harbor School on a one-on-one basis and also working with individual students. That doesn't scale. And so I think one of the big things that we learned that was such an important lesson, which is why we really were valuing the partnership that we had with DOE, was the importance of establishing a direct connection between students' NICSA accounts and their ability to sign up for NYC Ferry. So pulling those two systems together, and these are complex systems, but making sure that they talk to each other so that students can get a code, sign up for NYC Ferry, and then for the rest of the school year, they don't need to do anything else but buy tickets when they're ready. That became a really important aspect so that a program like this can scale.
That was going to be my follow-up in terms of how the agencies worked on an integratable system that spoke to one another. And is there also a particular reason that I know when we were signing some students up at Soundview Ferry Landing, the parents had to have access in order to get the students in? Is that solely because of the system that is utilized by the DOE?
Yeah, we found with this large of a program, it's really important that the verification of, are you actually a student, are you enrolled in school, are you eligible for this program, come from somewhere else, and especially when we consider that there are very strict, and rightly so, restrictions on personal information related to students. Everybody takes that very seriously. It made the most sense for them to be for DOE to be the real verification aspect, and for us to be able to implement it quickly, and frankly, not to keep people waiting for months and months to see if their application, if their verification went through. We came up with a system where people could get the codes from DOE, which doesn't give us any personal information, and then we could quickly make that happen on our side.
And how quickly or how easily do you think it would be for down the line, let's say we saw wild success over this next school year with students, for us utilizing the system with DOE to open up the opportunity for other students. Some of the more recent conversations we've been having as the bill is now being implemented and there's more information circulating, there are parents that have reached out, and even Councilmember Aviles, who I'm sure will ask questions, on some students that are actually moving throughout the city to go to middle school on the ferry system. So how likely do we see, if with the program that we're using now, that it could be expanded down the line?
Yeah, our focus right now is to make sure that this implementation goes smoothly. We are always evaluating service, fare policy, and discount policy, so that is something that we will look at in the future.
Great. The parents will be excited to talk about it. And then at the time, the administration estimated that the new fare structure would generate as much as $2 million in additional annual revenue. Was this estimate correct, and are there any other revenue generating opportunities that EDC is currently looking at?
So the fare change just took effect yesterday, so we don't yet have sort of report out numbers on what the impact of that fare change is going to be on the future. Okay.
In 2022, the comptroller performed an audit report that indicated that per EDC's audited financial statements, the net losses of the ferry operations were $30 million in FY 2017, $44 million in FY 2018, $53 million in FY 2019, $53 million in FY 2020, and $33 million in FY 2021. What is the current net gain or loss for FY 22, 23, and 24? And what are we doing to prevent losses in future years?
So I think one of the most important things to approach as part of this conversation is that what we are providing is a transit service, and all public transit is subsidized. I would not necessarily characterize the cost of a subsidy as a net loss. It's something we do want to minimize because subsidies are, of course, a financial city resource.
We'll let the comptroller know not to refer to it as a net loss.
But that said, in fiscal 22, the ferry operating deficit was $52 million, and in fiscal 23, it was $56.5 million. This information is available as we have made since Ferry Forward was implemented through supplemental financial information that we publish on our website, which includes information about all of the finances of the system, from subsidy, ridership, capital costs, and things like that.
Sure. Can you tell me the 23 number again?
23 was $56.5 million.
Thank you. The comptroller's audit report also found that the EDC had in the past significantly understated, again, their report's words, understated the amount the city was subsidizing ferry rides during each year of the New York City ferry operations. Since our last hearing, what has the EDC done to reduce that figure? And has the city's subsidy increased or decreased over the past 2 years?
So we've taken strong exception to, again, how things were characterized in that report, as EDC had always reported full information related to the finances of the system. However, in order to make things easier for people to access, we created the financial transparency, the supplemental financial information document, which we provide on our website. So that has a lot more information about the things that are being raised.
Ferries are primarily built out of aluminum, a lightweight material that increases fuel efficiency. In addition, the ferries are equipped with efficient T3 engines to reduce emissions. Could you briefly describe the sustainable nature in which the ferries are constructed? And are there any negative impacts from utilizing aluminum in the construction of the vessels?
Sure. And I also just want to say, I'm sorry, on the previous question, just to clarify, our subsidy provider has gone down since the implementation of Ferry Forward.
That was in your testimony as well.
Okay. As it relates to the construction of the vessels, so these are higher speed catamaran vessels that are purpose-built and designed with aluminum, which is a lighter weight metal, and a specific hull form that is designed to reduce the wake. Wake is not only disruptive to other users in the water, but it's also wasted energy. And so our passenger ferries are designed to have a pretty minimum wake behind them, which is one of the ways that we helped reduce the fuel burn on these vessels. Yes, every vessel that was built as part of the NYC Ferry program was at a minimum the Tier 3 vessel standard, which has since been superseded by a Tier 4 standard these are EPA air quality standards. And we have 2 vessels that are Tier 4 in the fleet. That represents already a fairly significant jump of some of the other vessels in the harbor. And so, we definitely lean hard into the fact that those are a good starting place, but we of course want to continue to develop them.
And in terms like operationally, so you're saying we have Tier 3 and Tier 4 vessels in the fleet currently. Is the goal to move the entire fleet over to Tier 4? Or is that within the RFP and the contract that as vessels come up or as they go out of order, we're replacing with the Tier 4?
So if we're ever considering new vessels or replacement vessels, we will always be looking at whatever the latest technology is, which for diesel burning vessels at the moment is Tier 4. We don't have a concrete plan, but we are looking for ways that we can expand Tier 4 engines into our fleet. Some vessels are capable of taking that engine, some are not, just because of technological sort of like differences within the hulls themselves. We continue to look at sustainability and have a brighter eye towards the future there.
And is the cost comparative between Tier 3 and Tier 4?
I would say they're relatively comparable. It is not like a huge delta when you are building the vessel from scratch. And because of the way the regulations are written, for any new vessels built, if they are diesel engines, that they would have to comply with Tier 4.
Thank you. Lastly, on accessibility, how does NYC Ferry ensure that persons with disabilities can fully access the ferry system, and are all NYC ferries accessible?
Yes, all NYC ferries were built to local law 68 and ADA standards, and all ferry landings are accessible to people with wheelchairs, canes, strollers, all of that.
And in terms of accessibility and the ferry landings during different inclement weather, how are we assuring that, for example, with snow, high winds, that folks people with disabilities have the same accessibility and utilization of the landing?
Yeah, so safety is paramount within NYC Ferry. We place a great deal of responsibility and trust in our captains and our crew, who are keeping an eye on riders and making sure that vessels are berthing when it is safe to do so. We have a lot of designs that help to make sure that the system is safe, but we also have operations where if there are winds that are too high, we will not berth, we will not dock.
And does each vessel have adequate number of wheelchair tie-downs? Okay.
Yes.
Great. And then I just have my final question on, 2 final questions on languages at the landings. What's the operational side of ensuring that we are meeting the language needs per ferry landing throughout communities?
Yes, so we are going through a signage update right now. They should all be in place either today or later this week. But one of the things there is that I believe that there is a QR code on the signage that will direct you to where you can find that information on our website in 7 different languages.
Okay.
And then there are, in our app, there's also, if you download the app and your phone is set to there's 40 different languages, I think 44 different languages, the app will translate into that language where your phone is. Same with the website. So we are trying to make sure that NYC Ferry is accessible in all languages.
So with the signage updates at each of the ferry landings, are we going to have comparable languages to the surrounding communities that are there, or are we going to do it in the top 3 or top 5?
We did an assessment several years ago of populations, not only who are in the service area, like where the ferry landings are and what languages are spoken in those neighborhoods, but also, what people respond to in our surveys. So we've identified that there are 6 non-English languages that represent the whole system. Spanish, Chinese, Polish, Korean, Russian, Yiddish are the languages that NYC Ferry supports as critical languages.
Okay. And then in terms of the senior discount option at some of our landings. So as you folks know, not every single landing has a booth that has a person. I went to a recent community board meeting that was raised to me by one of our seniors in the community that the senior discount could not be, the machine they went to purchase their ticket, the senior discount was not offered. Have we seen that overall as within the complaint system, and are we addressing that?
Yes, so the ticket machines that we have are not able to verify who a specific person might be.
Yep.
And so for people who are not using the app, if they want to buy discount tickets, those are sold at Pier 11.
Right.
We know that this is not a sufficient system, and so we are looking right now at upgrading our ticket system with one of the main focuses is solving this problem to make sure that at every single landing you can buy a discount ticket.
Are we looking at utilizing the folks that are maybe allowing people to make the purchase and having a ID verification before you get on the boat, or what avenues are we looking at to address some of that?
We have not solidified the exact plan on sort of what each technology is available from different ticketing machines. So we will, once we have a ticketing platform that we're able to dig into, that will allow us to sort of understand a little better what the exact logistics look like.
Okay, I'd like to be kept in the loop on that, just because I have some folks that are trying to purchase it, and while they're still purchasing, they are seniors and would like their discount.
Yes.
I'll now turn it over to Chair Brooks Powers, and I'd before so like to acknowledge council members Riley and Ressler as joining the committee hearing.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna pivot now to legislation that's under consideration today, starting with the Rockaways. So the last time EDC was before the council about the New York City Ferry in 2022, I asked about the possibility of expanding ferry service along the Rockaway Peninsula and was told that it was not possible due to the MTA South Channel subway bridge. I'm concerned because as more and more housing gets built in Rockaways, the people that live there need a way to get around, and the current transportation solutions just doesn't cut it. I know that ferry service is only one potential piece of the puzzle, but I want to make sure that nothing gets overlooked. So since 2022, have you all had the chance to give ferry expansion in the Rockaways a second look? I will also include that in the last hearing, I had requested of EDC to look at alternative solutions considering the challenge with the subway bridge.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers. As it relates to the Rockaways, you've mentioned and remains some of the challenges that we have faced in previous iterations of this, which is that the fleet that we have, the 38 vessels, and our sort of commitment since Ferry Forward to really focus on managing our finances such that we are not building new types of vessels and new types of facilities, that in that period we have not, ended up with a new vessel design or anything like that. We have found it to be challenging to go further east, as you mentioned, because of the subway bridge, which we have visited in years ago on a ferry to make sure that we really understood what that was like, and have found those challenges to remain as of today.
But has EDC taken any steps to really thoughtfully look at some alternative ways of bringing ferry service to the eastern end of the peninsula?
So in previous iterations, we've actually done separate pilot services to try to extend shuttle buses, because given the physical constraints that we had to go further east from where we are, we found we were looking for creative ways to try to make other places in the Rockaways, for points further east, more accessible to NYC Ferry. We found, unfortunately, through those, one pilot happened in the fall and winter, one happened in the summer, and in both cases we ended up with very low ridership despite a pretty extensive marketing campaign in an attempt to get people aware that they could use that as a service. One of the challenges is that once you get to where we are already at Beach 108th Street, it's already about an hour's journey, and going even further really starts to add to that and making ferry and a ferry and a shuttle bus far less competitive than some of the other admittedly limited options that there are.
No, I could have told you that about the ferry shuttle. Okay, so are there technologies or improvements that we can invest in that can make the ferry expansion feasible in the future, or some other approach that could more efficiently connect people in the Eastern Rockaway communities to the ferry? And again, wanting to, like, EDC is there to be innovative. Like, you all help to invest and build things. So I'm interested in knowing if there are any technologies that you guys may be aware of that we could invest in.
So, in terms of, it is not the case that you cannot build a vessel that could get under the bridge that we're talking about. At this juncture, we are not expanding, we have no current plans for expanding the fleet or changing the vessel types that we have. The vessel types that we have been, have really prioritized their ability to work throughout many parts of the fleet so that we have good flexibility throughout the system. It is not to say that a specific purpose-built vessel could not be built. However, what we found in the past when we've asked this question is that often when you get to a smaller vessel that goes under bridges like that, you end up sacrificing on other things. So you might not be able to get a vessel that is quite as stable when you're going out over the ocean to get into Lower Manhattan. So there are different vessels that could be investigated or sort of vessel hull types and things like that. They're not currently on our, because we don't have an expansion plan at this point.
When you look into a project like this, do you only look on the one side, like costs or feasibility? Like, do you only look at on the one side, cost or feasibility, or do you also examine the potential benefit that such a project could bring to the area?
Yeah, so whenever we've thought about expansion in past iterations and would be part of any sort of consideration if we were to go down this path, there are many factors that are included in it. So we would look at communities in terms of where people live, where they work, what their existing transit options are, how often those transit options come, how long it takes to get places, the demographics of a neighborhood, just taking a look at all aspects of what is the value to riders. And that is also taken into account with looking at things like the cost of service, the cost of places that are far away that have certain costs, and how all those things look together.
And have you, excuse me, have you looked into what a new transportation option could mean to the people living in transit deserts like Far Rockaway?
Our 2018-2019 study did a fairly comprehensive look throughout the city about what the different opportunities and needs were as it relates to waterfront communities where ferry service had some potential, and that still remains on our website.
Just going back to a question that the majority leader had asked in terms of the subsidies and the communities that get the subsidies, does EDC know which ferry landing has the largest subsidy?
So we track ridership by individual landing. It is not such a cut and dry thing on sort of how to assign individual costs to every single site. We've taken a look at different things, but mainly I think the main part of what we are evaluating when we're thinking about how the system is operating is where are we seeing high ridership, where are we seeing people who are using the system, maybe not the most people, but most consistently. So it is important to us, even if it's not, the highest ridership landing in the system, if it has consistent riders who are going to work every day, occasionally in the summer, we have some fun, people who just want to get out on water.
No, thank you for that, I get that, but I just wanted to know, does EDC know which of those ferry stops is receiving the largest subsidy? And if so, which one is it?
Yeah, so we have looked at the costs of different routes and different riderships. It is hard to assign to a very single number without sort of like question at it whether or not you can say like a subsidy for an individual landing is this. There are many different ways to look at it.
I would imagine that there's some, in the agency, there's some type of analysis of these different ferry standards to know which one is most successful, even if you're looking at the ridership and what an individual ride subsidy would be anyway. I think we can figure that out. So I would like to have that information. And in addition to that, I'd like to also have the information of that average household income for that neighboring community there. Because I'm trying to understand where we're investing public dollars in terms of subsidies versus where we have a need for it and not seeing that happen so that we can course correct with EDC on that.
Sure, we'd be happy to follow up on that.
Thank you for that. Next, I'm going to talk about Coney Islands. I'm going to allow Councilmember Brandon to go into the weeds of it, but I did want to ask a couple of questions around this piece of legislation as well. As I know DOT is aware, I did a visit out there during a past transportation and infrastructure tour and learned about the dynamic with the ferry there. And I wanted to know, have you conducted any internal studies about the feasibility of an expansion of a ferry in Coney Island?
Yes, so we actually, the Coney Island has kind of a long history in terms of what we've looked at in connection with NYC Ferry. We actually started building a ferry landing in Coney Island Creek and paused that work in 2021 because we found that, you know, despite the upfront work that we had done in design and planning for it, there remain unknown factors like shifts in sand that really caused navigational and safety concerns that would cause real issues if we were to proceed with it. So we did pause work on the Coney Island Ferry landing in 2021. We also did follow up with the community in the year and years following, evaluating whether or not there were other opportunities to provide ferry service to Coney Island, whether it's in the creek or even on the ocean side. We shared that study with the community and talked about the reality that we had found real challenges both on the creek side, in and outside the sand spit, which is a sand feature in Coney Island Creek, as well as on the ocean-facing side, because the costs and the feasibility of building breakwaters to attenuate waves from the Atlantic Ocean was just so high that it was not financially responsible for us to proceed.
Also looking at Willets Point, in your testimony you mentioned you would be examining the possibility of a ferry to Willets Point as a part of the redevelopment project there. Is studying increased ferry service going to be a part of future EDC project development?
I think that broadly what we want to be doing with Willets Point in terms of studying for ferry service is understanding what the costs would be for something like that, what the potential for ridership development is, and understanding that in the context of the broader system. We haven't tied that study to any specific actions related to the Willets Point development, for additional development.
I'm going to move on to the fare increase. So ticket prices for the New York City Ferry increased yesterday, with regular ticket prices rising from $4 to $4.50, bundles of 10 tickets rising from $27.50 to $29, and discounted prices increasing from $135 to $145. Can you please walk the committee through how you determine ferry prices?
Absolutely. So we take fares really seriously because this is one of the most important things that people experience when they're deciding to ride NYC Ferry. What we saw in our previous fare change was that by increasing the single ticket price, we were able to, and allowing there to be a 10-trip bundle, it really allowed us to create some differentiation between those who are commuters, those who are using NYC Ferry on a regular basis, and people who are just, maybe going out for an occasional ride. Having those two different fare products really helps us target our drive towards affordability to make sure that commuters, for example, are paying the same as they pay on the subway or bus, and that if you are riding, that once in a while ride, that you're able and willing to pay a little bit more. So when we did our fare analysis based on the last year and a half to 2 years of data, we really looked at who was riding more frequently, how did this impact ridership, and there were, while we saw overall ridership growth, there was information sort of in between that we had to take a look at, where we learned that people who are using the 10-pack, they are riding more often. People who are using the single trip, they are riding a little less often, but they were paying more. And so all these factors really went into the analysis, where we had set forth an objective to increase fare revenue without negatively impacting the overall ridership of the system. So we got to our levels at $4.50 and $2.90 by really targeting how we can allow people, those occasional riders and tourists, to pay a little bit more while holding the costs fairly consistent for our regular riders.
So EDC's President Andrew Kimball noted that along with fare increases, service and vessel upgrades would also be forthcoming. Can you provide us with more details about these planned upgrades and improvements?
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit earlier about some of the feature upgrades, so things like Wi-Fi, seat availability, translations, increased access to languages in the app and on the website. All of these are part of what riders are experiencing, so I think that's one of the things that we really focus there. In terms of I'll leave it there.
Were you finished?
Sorry, the other half of your question was?
Just wanting to have the details in terms of the planned upgrades and improvements.
Thank you. You had mentioned services, and that was the other thing. In previous testimony, we had talked about a future where we'd be doing things with our service plan. So when we introduced something like South Brooklyn's Faster Connections pilot, this cut the travel time for riders from Bay Ridge significantly, allowing for real improvement. So we continue to do as much as we can to be creative and flexible with the system that we have and the landings that we have, and to innovate so that they are most efficient for us and for riders.
Thank you for that. Now, with inflation and rent increases over the past 4 years, does EDC find that now is the best time to increase ferry prices, particularly to those who qualify for the discounted program, especially as you're working on increasing like the diversity in terms of your ridership? And how much additional revenue does EDC anticipate the fare increase will result in?
So we always take, as I mentioned, fare changes seriously. It's an important thing that we want to do with a lot of thought and assessment for it before we make any changes like that. And so for something like the discount program, a lot of our energy in the last 2 years has been making more and more people aware of it. As Franny had mentioned, having up to thousands and thousands of people who are part of that program is a big increase from the past, and the fivefold increase in ticket usage is really important. Pardon me, a sixfold increase in ticket usage has been one of our central points, is like making sure people who do qualify for that program are aware. In terms of the actual change in the fares, bringing it to $2.90 and $1.45 for discount riders, that was meeting and kind of becoming more consistent with what costs are for on the MTA, and allowing us to say that for those who are able to spend more money, we're able to offer them products at $4.50 as one of those options. I'd also like to just offer that over the summer, we introduced more and more options for people who were willing to spend more. So for those people who are willing to spend more money for a reserved seat or for a one-seat ride from places like Long Island City or Greenpoint to the Rockaways, we actually created new services that are catered with $10 tickets, a much higher price point. But if people are interested in paying for that, they are allowed to. And that helps generate additional revenue for the system. For the Rockaway route, while we do offer those premium services, we always make sure that at least half of our seats are available at our existing fare rates. So if you are using any other fare product, there's always a seat going out to the Rockaways.
And to answer your question about anticipated revenue, we anticipate that this fare change will bring in $2 million in additional revenue per year. About half of that we anticipate from organic ridership growth and half because of the fare change.
Thank you for that. And then for DOT, I just wanted to pivot back to the studies. I just wanted to ask, does DOT have any active studies right now that we should be aware of in terms of exploring ferry expansions, globally speaking?
There are no studies that are reflecting anything out of step with what the ferries team at EDC has said.
Can you just bring the mic closer?
Yeah, there are no studies that DOT is taking on separate from the work that is being done at NYC or New York City ferries.
And do you have any concerns with the legislation that's sponsored by me calling on you to do a study for ferry feasibility for Rockaway?
Of course, we would recommend it to reflect the current nature of how expansion is being done, that it's being led through the ferries team at EDC. But that's something we feel we would address in the back and forth after a hearing.
Thank you for that. Passing it back over to my co-chair.
I just have two small questions. One for EDC. In terms of the ridership, are we seeing higher ridership for the ones with a price point like a $10 ride?
We saw, yes, we saw an increase in ridership for those kind of premium priced services this past summer, which has been really great. Some of those services are actually creating a revenue positive service, so that's really great because it helps drive down subsidy for the rest of the system.
Okay.
But 10-pack users, we are seeing that more people who use the 10-pack are taking the ferry more frequently. And even those same types of riders who were taking the ferry at $275 before, we've induced them to ride more often. So we've found that ridership among 10-pack users is increased.
Great, thank you. And then for DOT, just a very pointed question. Does DOT have a desire or envision themselves being expanding their role as operating additional ferries throughout New York City?
Yeah, I'm unaware of any conversations around that currently, so none planned.
Great, thank you. Chair?
That was one of the questions I was going to ask, so we're in the same wave with that. And then second and last, I know in your testimony you said that the borough president, I think, is in support of a study to be done for Willets Point as a part of that development. With the downtown Far Rockaway rezoning, was there a study ever connected to that for a ferry service at all?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. I don't believe so, but we can check on that for you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to turn over time to our members. I appreciate my colleagues for understanding some time constraints from other members of the committee, so I will now turn it over to Councilmember Aviles, followed by Narcisse, then Ariola.
Thank you, chairs. Thank you, EDC team and DOT team, for being here and all your work. It's certainly there have been a lot of improvements, and I have seen, on the ground, your outreach efforts to community, and I know it's a long slog, but I think you'll mention one thing really important, eyes to the system as a really important way of growing this system, and certainly growing New Yorkers understanding that this system is there for them regardless. and getting over this hump of like, this is kind of the new thing for the rich people over there, and we just go to the subway. One way to do that is through our students. And so, congrats certainly on the chair's legislation and rolling out the high school program. I think the thing I want to flag for you, and we've talked about this before, is Red Hook is a transportation desert, a home of Homeport. Harbor Middle School is there, and the school uses the ferry a lot, but it is a financial burden to take classes to use the ferry. It costs them several $100s for a Title I school. We have to do better, and we can do better. If we teach students that this is a real viable way, we grow that system tremendously. So I just want to absolutely encourage, our students have been advocating, the Harbor Middle School in particular, to be included in this pilot. It's only 177 students. They have been at this for 2 years to say, don't forget us. So I have to remind you all that we cannot forget our Harbor School students, certainly our Red Hook community, which I know there's been a lot of work in. So putting the plug in for finding a way to include those 177 students sooner than later. But the class trip, the use of the ferry, is an important one. We pay $30 or more to cross the Verrazano Bridge. There are resources there. Our students should be able to, class trips, be able to use the ferry at not an exorbitant price. It costs anywhere, I was doing the calculations, $5.8 to $6 per ticket additional per student. That's a lot. That's just transportation. So I encourage that. I'd like to hear an update about Homeport 2 and what is happening there. So if you could just talk to me about where it is. We haven't been seeing any activity, and I'd love to know what's going on.
Sure. Thank you for those comments, and really appreciate the advocacy that you provided here. As it relates to Homeport 2, there have been the project is broken up into two main components, an in-water component and then an uplands component. The in-water component, as you may have seen and noticed, is largely completed. So the piles where the vessels would get tied up, including the travel lift area where a vessel would eventually be pulled out of the water, those have actually been completed. That was leading because we had gone through some additional design and permitting and coordination with all the different players in this area for the warehouse and the utilities that are happening. We do hope to be breaking ground on that either later this year or early next year, and we're happy to provide more follow-up with your office as soon as we have a more tight schedule there.
And in terms of, you mentioned, I guess where are the vessels for the ferry system being constructed currently?
So all 38 vessels were built somewhere in the Gulf. So there were 3 or 4 different shipyards that were utilized at the time. They were built largely between 2015 and 2021. And so it was spread out over multiple shipyards, but they were all built in the South and they brought up.
And in terms of maintenance and repair, where does that happen?
So maintenance and repair currently is mostly handled at our facility at Pier C in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It's been a really incredible opportunity to not just launch a ferry system, but basically build a small shipyard right there in the Navy Yard, which brings back, of course, all of these maritime routes and the ability to create a maritime pipeline for jobs, which we've been really proud of through the operator. Similar facilities are going to be built in Red Hook. So at Homeport 2, the ability to pull a vessel out of the water, that travel lift, is one of the major assets that allows our operator to do that maintenance right there in the place. So we're looking forward because at Homeport 2, there will be maintenance opportunities, job opportunities, and lots of ways for people to engage with the system.
And lastly, Chair, because I also have to run, for the travel lift in Homeport 2, is that, what's the situation there?
It will be similar to the one that we have at Pier C.
Oh, okay.
I don't know the exact details of it, but it's the same intention, is that it is a basically a mobile crane that lifts a vessel up and pulls it up onto dry land.
Is that part yet built out, or is that something to
The
be done?
track for it is, I don't know about the machinery.
Okay, I'll follow up on this. I have very specific questions around Homeport too. I guess one last question, thank you, chairs, is I also have the benefit of having Brooklyn Army Terminal there, and my daughter insisted that we use the Rockaway, and she didn't want to do the Rockaway Reserve, which I was cool with, to see what the regular people deal with. We waited 5 boats, 3 hours in the hot sun, because every boat that came to BAT from Manhattan, if you had Rockaway Reserve, you got on. If you were regular folks, you didn't, because they were all packed, which I was delighted to see, by the way. So feeling mystified and a little bit upset by it. They were all really crowded by the time they got to South Brooklyn. So many, many people waited, and many people left, actually. We ended up not going on. I went another time.
Yeah.
But it does beg this situation, like how do we rebalance at the peak and make sure that people on the southern part of the route don't have to wait 4 hours in the hot sun with no shade.
So absolutely, I agree with you, and that is not an acceptable service level. I would ask, if you ever have an experience like that, I do ask you to reach out to us. For something that extreme, it really isn't acceptable. What we've done in the past is that we've actually created, because the problem of vessels filling up at Wall Street before they get to Brooklyn Army Terminal, this goes back many years, and we've instituted policies to make sure that we are preserving some number of seats for people at Sunset Park to get on board on every Rockaway-bound vessel. So unfortunately, I'm sorry to hear about your experience, but we have a plan that should be implemented on that, and if it's not, please let us know.
Yeah, and we will follow up with the operator on that.
Yeah, we'll follow up, and I think it was a combination of high peak, high demand. Rockaway, you could see the Rockaway rocket people running on, and everybody else damn.
Yeah, no, it is important
but
to us.
It's a real thing, and I guess it speaks to the rebalancing during those times, because I saw a good number of people, including myself, leave after 3 hours. And I would like EDC to really consider at these landings, it's hot and there is no shade anywhere to be found. What are the structures that you put there? Because we create a whole different set of problems that could, that are not $1 billion, but certainly protect residents from the heat. It's a serious thing. So thank you, chairs. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to second and double down on working for our middle school students in Brooklyn and throughout the city. I'd like to acknowledge we've also been joined by Councilmember Stevens, and I'd like to recognize Councilmember Narcisse, followed by Ariola, then Brannon.
Thank you, chairs. Thank you. Some of my questions are already asked, so thank you for that. So I'm going to come down instead of citywide, coming back to my district. I know that a study was done for Canarsie Pier. Any information you can share, any updates? But let me be honest, I'm very disappointed because there is no plan to expand. And I know there's a lot of communities throughout the city. We have waterfront, we can benefit from a ferry, but we're not getting any transportation there, and we need that. So if you can share, coming back to my question, any study was done for, the study was done for Canarsie Pier, so I want to know if there's any information that you can share with us. Keep in mind too that there's many transportation desert like ours, like Canarsie area, and population are increasing. So therefore we need to relieve some of the transportation problem that we're facing in the city of New York, overcrowded. So please, can you answer the Canarsie part for me?
Thank you, Councilmember. So as I mentioned in my testimony, while we don't have any current plans for expansion, I do want to just make sure it's clear that we have heard and really appreciate the advocacy and enthusiasm that we've heard out of the Canarsie neighborhood through organizations on the ground, your advocacy as well. We know, and acknowledge that there are places where people are looking for additional service and where ferry service may be able to provide opportunities for different communities. While we don't have a current expansion plan to talk about today, we are definitely aware, and Canarsie has very much made itself known as those who are really interested in the future of ferry service.
So the study, I'm very much interested. Do you have any information you can share on that study that was done?
The previous formal study that was done was in 2018 and 19, which is available on the website, and we can provide that to you following the brief, this conversation.
Because I want to know why we were not qualified, because it was like, I remember former mayor was very dedicated to make it happen. And then just from 1 second, everything just changed on us and we did not get that fed.
Yeah, I don't have more to add to sort of the prior administration, but I will say just that in the prior study, there was an evaluation. It talks about things like travel time and ridership opportunities from the Canarsie neighborhood. If we were to look at expansion in the future, we will 100% take another look at the information that was provided there. But as of right now, we don't have a current plan.
Yeah, as you can see, Jabril from Fluxy is not going to leave it alone, because we organize around here because we definitely we can benefit from that. So I thank you for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Ariola, followed by Brannon, then Ressler.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming today. I know that everyone is enjoying that we have ferry transportation, especially to the Rockaway Peninsula, which I have the honor of sharing, representing with Chairwoman Sylvina Brooks Powers. That being said, we do need more service. We do need you to identify that probably the most of your income and the most ridership consistently is from Manhattan to the Rockaway Peninsula. So I'd like to see some type of subsidy for those who live in the 11693 to 11691 area codes. So just put that on your radar. We are having a really big problem with the ferry system while it's traveling from Manhattan to the Rockaway Peninsula. It passes the areas of Roxbury and Breezy Point. At the point it passes, it is going at a very high rate of speed, and it is very close to the shore. And what's happening is it's causing an acceleration of erosion for the beaches that are there, and a deterioration of the seawall that was there, put there for the resiliency after Superstorm Sandy. So we have reached out to your intergovernmental office, and we will be setting up a meeting to see what we can do. But I wanted to put that on your radar, that the ferry has to slow down. It must slow down, and it has to go further out into the channel because it's creating actual waves on a bayside where it looks like it's a beach, an ocean beach, and not a bayside beach. So just want to put that on your radar. The other thing is, last year you adjusted the 515 ferry to be kind of like a 535 or 536 ferry, which caused like havoc because there were people that were commuting from downtown to the Rockaways. Now the ferry was overcrowded and they had to wait for a later ferry. Is this something that you're going to do again this year off season, or have we learned from last year that it just didn't work?
So one of the things that we really focus on through this scheduling is to make sure that we are providing consistent and reliable service. And what's really important to us, in fact, is making sure that there are enough seats, particularly, as you mentioned, for the Rockaway Riders, which has a really consistent ridership base for those who are commuting. What we found was that in the PM peak, we were struggling last summer, so not this past summer, but the summer prior, where people who were going to the beach for fun were also competing for seats with people who are trying to get home. So what happened was we actually added service, which is what led to a slight shift in the departure schedule, is that there were more ferries per hour departing to go to the Rockaways than previously. So while we shifted the schedule, it's actually increasing the capacity to get more and more people on. What we did this year is just made sure that we really got to people early and often. So there were announcements made, emails sent, a lot of service advisories to all of our Rockaway riders, along with everyone else, to make sure that they knew the schedule was changing. This year, I have not heard of as many concerns about that shift, and people tend to, we're able to get a little bit more familiar with those seasonal changes. But like I said, we want to make sure that we are providing enough service for people who want to get places.
Yeah, our office got innumerable complaints because that 515 that commuters were dedicated to get on, and there were many of them were now pushed back, and they were put back with people who are getting out later from work and getting onto the same ferry. So if you haven't made the change yet, I would ask you not to, and to keep it as is. That 515 ferry is widely utilized by the commuters from our district who are dedicated commuters and ferry riders. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Brannan, followed by Ressler, then Stevens.
Thank you, chairs. Thank you for organizing this hearing. EDC, it's good to see you guys. Appreciate your partnership on all the things. And I want to get into the Coney Island ferry, but first, just to talk a little bit about the thought that goes into the infrastructure surrounding ferries in terms of getting people to the ferry, right? I think I fought really hard to bring back the Bay Ridge Ferry until we sort of were able to get ridership up to a decent level. It was always a fight every year to sort of, to a fight for its existence, right? To sort of, justify its existence. And part of the problem was that I think for all of my colleagues is the ferries are great if you live near the ferry or if you can get to the ferry in some way, where they're biking or whatever. Unfortunately, not all of our ferries are connected to the existing transportation infrastructure. So, and there's always talk about doing ferry shuttles to the ferry, that kind of thing, but without any, without funding streams that are guaranteed, it's hard to, I can fund a shuttle for 1 year. If I can get the money the following year, I'll do it again. But it's something, people need to rely on it. So how much thought goes into the infrastructure around getting people to the ferry to make them successful and to make them sustainable?
Of course. Good to see you, Councilmember. Thank you for your partnership on ferries over the years. So I'll talk about it in kind of a general sense as it relates to whenever we've had prior planning studies or discussions around ferry services. In general, we have looked for opportunities to place ferry landings where there are, by sort of definitionally, gaps in the existing transit network. So where the subway is half a mile or more inland, where the bus does, you have to, go a long ways before you could get to a subway. We are actually looking for kind of these least connected places as opportunities where ferry service can really help connect a neighborhood where they don't have great access to other options. And so where we find success is where the other transit options are not good. That's often an opportunity to create a ridership base if we are able to connect the ferry service to where people want to go. In terms of the upland infrastructure, ferries, at least through NYC Ferry in our current iteration, have generally been a pretty light touch in terms of physical infrastructure. It's a floating barge, a gangway, and a couple of piles, and of course the utility connections. But the narrow scope of that work is what allowed us to build a ferry system in the sort of timeline that we did without having to, really see if we could make major investments in roadways and other places that might otherwise be required.
Yeah, as a noted ferry apologist, I want them all to succeed, but part of the challenge is the connectivity, right? Is getting people to the ferry. Obviously, you have the challenge of not being able to use a Metro card to get, if you're taking a bus ride, now you're talking about a two fare situation. So I'd like to see EDC focus on that too, because just setting up a ferry, for any of my colleagues who are dreaming, including me, who's dreaming of putting a ferry somewhere else in our district or getting our first ferry in our neighborhood, it's hard when you have to fight to justify its existence every year, and then EDC says, well, no one's riding the ferry. It's like, well, yeah, because no one can get to it. So it creates this sort of feedback loop that, and we all know why, because I think a lot more people would use the ferries if they could get to the ferry. So that's one. And so just talking about the 2022 feasibility study for the Coney Island ferry, I'm old enough to remember in prior administration when there was talk around building a Coney Island ferry, whether it was on the creek side or whether it was on the ocean side. The issue of, the issue that EDC is now putting in our way, as far as it would cost $250 million to do it right because of challenges on the ocean side. That was never an issue before. Like when we talked about the Coney Island Ferry version 1, whether it was creek or ocean side, it was always about viability in terms of how many people were going to use the ferry. So I kind of feel like this is a new excuse that we're hearing. I don't disagree that it would be a challenge. I don't think the $250 million, I think that number is absurd. I don't think there's any, what is the average cost to build a ferry dock?
10 to 15 at this
So
juncture.
that would mean that this one would be, it's absurd. And I'm not a marine engineer, but when I hang out on the beach in Coney Island and I see the Rockaway ferry going back and forth, passing by Steeplechase Pier, maybe 20, 30 feet away from where a dock would be, it's hard for the average person to think that it's an impossibility or it's a $250 million impossibility to make that happen. So the legislation that I'm pushing is to really dig back into that issue because, again, knowing that in the past there was a different excuse, and now the excuse has become that it's not feasible because of the water, it's hard for us to believe. Really, last thing, the Environmental Bond Act, which authorized New York State to spend about $4 billion, I don't know if any of my colleagues asked about that, but it authorized the state to spend about $4 billion on critical environmental infrastructure projects. Are we talking about using any of that money for future ferry projects?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the fund?
So the Environmental Bond Act, it gives New York State the authority to spend $4.2 billion. Are we fighting to try to get some of that money for some of these projects?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, well, we should be, right? Okay, I don't want to take up all the time, but there's, in a city of concrete and asphalt, I think we forget that it's a city of waterfronts, right? 5 boroughs, 4 of them are islands, are connected to one. I saw bringing an express ferry to Bay Ridge has been an absolute game changer. There's no quicker way to get to Manhattan from southern Brooklyn than by the ferry in Bay Ridge. I think the mayor likes to talk a lot about how cool and hip all these places are in like Coney Island. Everyone talks about Coney Island, how great it is. Everyone's got to come to Coney Island. But then when it comes to investing money in Coney Island, we start getting excuses. So we're going to fight really hard on that. We want to see it happen. Impossible for us to believe that this is, it's just impossible for us to believe that it would cost this much money. So we look forward to working with you on that and appreciate your partnership.
And Councilmember, thank you for your question and also for your advocacy around Coney Island. We know how interested your community is in Ferry. We share the passion about Ferry. I just wanted to specify with respect to like the study and the really high cost, the $250 million, that would not be, my understanding is for the ferry land. I can't speak to what prior administrations had done with respect to the study, but our understanding that was more with respect to wave attenuation, so it really was building a very, very long seawall. James and the team might know better. It was like 3 football fields, I think, in order to make landing at that site safe to be able to bring boats in. So just wanted to clarify for you and to know that we really do take it seriously. We're not looking to throw up excuses.
I've got no problem going and building a coalition and fighting to find the money. I think I do that pretty well, but we need to land on a price that we actually can all rally around. And I think the $250 million price is like if you don't want to sell your house, you sell it, you put it up for $250 because no one's going to buy it, right? So we want to get to a spot where we can all agree on the feasibility and what it would actually cost. So then we could go and try to access some of this money, federal, state money, whatever it may be. All right, thank you.
Thank you for answering the council members' questions. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Ressler, followed by Stevens.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader and Chair, both co-chairs. I just firstly want to commend our Majority Leader on her legislation to make it more affordable for students to be able to commute by ferry. Personally, I think it should be the same as our MetroCard policy, our MTA policy. It should be free for students who are commuting every day, but half price is a major step in the right direction. I'm very proud that the 33rd District is the capital of the ferry system in New York City. We have not one, not two, six different ferry landings in District 33. We love the ferry. And Councilmember Gutierrez and Stevens are jealous of the 33rd Council District. If you couldn't hear that, if they weren't on the mic, that was what they were saying. But in all seriousness, we appreciate the work that EDC does to make the ferry system work. There are some concerns, though, that I did want to highlight today. And I will just say, I thought the Ferry and Forward plan, or whatever you called it, from a couple of years ago was generally quite good and responsible and a thoughtful way to improve management of the system. So I just want to broadly commend your policies there. There are a few things, though, that I am concerned about. I'll start with the private pier. So how many of the piers in our ferry system are privately owned?
I believe India Street is the only one.
The only one. And do you evaluate the operational, do you evaluate how many days per year each ferry is open?
Yes, we do track that.
And which ferry site has been closed the most?
I don't have the last year's numbers right in front of me.
Over
but
time.
I can provide that.
Over time, have you looked at that and analyzed which ferry pier is closed most frequently?
We have not done a single analysis for that, but we do track when there are outages, and so we do have that information.
I mean, dollars to donuts, I would tell you that the one privately owned pier in our whole system is the one that's been shut down the most, where we've had multiple significant sustained outages and serious problems. And I just want to come back and ask, is EDC looking at a way to have a publicly owned pier in our community?
So as it relates to Greenpoint, and first of all, thank you for your comments earlier, and hopefully not getting me in trouble with your counterparts for having as many landings. But as it relates to...
Can't all represent the 33rd District, you know?
As it relates to Greenpoint Landing, there was a sustained outage. There was a safety concern and a real issue that needed to be addressed. And one of the things that we took very seriously was working closely with the owners, who there had been a transition at the time, it then became Lend-Lease, to make sure that we were giving them close advice, counsel, and guidance on everything that we know about building ferry landings and building them with the sort of right levels of safety and protection. So what did take a long time, because there are challenges that anyone would face on permitting and getting all these the materials. What we saw through that work was an entity that was largely acting responsibly to create a safe and renewed ferry landing. So since then, there are, I would say, kind of the regular amount of outages that do happen from time to time at other landings. We have not seen any sustained outages in the way that we had seen when the landing needed to be pulled out of service. And based on the things we asked them,
I hear you. We had a number of outages prior to that, but I do want to just repeat my question. Are you considering any potential publicly owned ferry site for the Greenpoint community?
We're not currently considering a change in ownership.
I just want to underscore, I think it's critically important that this is a part of our mass transit infrastructure. That's what our ferry system has become. We need to ensure that the city has control of our mass transit infrastructure. And this one pier being privately owned is a concern for me, a concern that we'll always have the access that we need, the reliable service that we deserve. And I do think that EDC should continue to look at alternative options for how we can have a publicly owned ferry pier serving the Greenpoint community. I broadly commended earlier in my remarks your Ferry Forward plan, or whatever. Is that what it was called?
Yes.
Yeah, I got it right. There you go. Sorry? No. From a couple of years ago. But there were changes that were implemented earlier this year that I am more concerned about. And really building off the comments that Council Members Ariola and Brannon had both made with regard to the frequency of evening routes, and so that the ferry is dependable for the people who need it, and bus service, shuttle bus service to get people to and from the ferry. The evening routes that we've seen reduced on the East River Ferry route make it harder for commuters coming home, especially some of the late night trips. We really struggled during the G-Train shutdown when EDC refused to add additional ferry service to help make up for the lack of G-Train access in our community. And secondly, the loss of the bus on 34th Street has been a challenge for some of the people who rely on the ferry commuting into Manhattan. So just wanted to ask, are you reconsidering any of the reductions in evening services and the elimination of the 34th Street bus route? Is that something that you'd consider bringing back to help maintain the vibrancy and high utilization of the ferry system from constituents certainly in the 33rd and across the city?
So as we're thinking about service planning, there are, of course, the kind of trade-offs that you're talking about. And so when we did end service a little earlier, we also added more service, particularly this summer. We had the most number of vessels on the East River route operating at any given time. So that's more than we've ever had in the past. I believe service was about every 20 to 22 minutes, something like that, which is as fast as we've ever put service out on the East River. So where we see the need and the demand for capacity, that's where we really center the most of our energy to make sure that we are accommodating as many people as possible, given the finite resources that we have. As it relates to the shuttle bus unfortunately never rebounded after the pandemic. The shuttle bus on East 34th Street served 4 different routes. It should, in my mind, was always a thing that, everyone who's coming to Midtown should want to ride this shuttle bus and take it and go further inland. We were seeing subsidies per rider of over $30 per trip. So for an individual person who was getting off of the ferry for whom we already had a subsidy, we were talking about a $30 subsidy for that shuttle bus because it was so underutilized despite our efforts to encourage people to ride it, to get people on board. So as part of that, we really made a choice to right-size the services that we had.
Okay. I appreciate, and I'll shut up here, but I appreciate that there was at different times of day increased service. But for many of my constituents who've moved into waterfront developments in the North Side and Greenpoint, they did it with the idea that they would be able to depend on ferry service, and not just ferry service, during the heart of rush hour in the morning and narrowly in the evening. They want to be able to take the ferry if they're coming home from work at 7:30 or 8 o'clock and be able to access a ferry reliably. And the reductions in service have been a real challenge. We've heard many complaints from constituents. It's an ongoing concern, and we really do hope that you'll consider revisiting those evening schedules because they're a real important lifeline for folks who live on the waterfront in the North Brooklyn portion of our district. Thank you very much, and thank you to the chairs for having us here today.
Thank you, Council Member. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you so much. Thank you, chairs, for having this very important hearing. I just have a couple questions just on some of the disparities. I represent the West Bronx, and most folks know that in the Bronx, we don't have access to our waterfront. And so it's just so, to kind of just hear some of my colleagues and to hear that I have a council member and a colleague who has 6 landings in his district, and my district often isn't considered at all for a ferry. And so I'm just trying to get a breakdown. What's the breakdown of the ferries throughout the boroughs? So we could start with Manhattan. How many do they have? How many ferry lands do they have?
4, 5, 6.
7. It's 7.
Pardon me.
Mm-hmm. Just always understand, I already know the answer to the questions that I'm asking, so let's make sure we stay on point here. Just in Brooklyn?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I don't know? Okay, so we know we already got 6 because Lincoln has 6 in his district. So it's a minimum of 6. How many in the Bronx?
2.
2. We don't think that that's already disproportionate. We're not even gonna go to Queens. I don't know. How is that even possible? We're not thinking about how things are disproportionate when we're thinking about where we're putting these landings. Have you ever done a study on the race of the folks who are riding the ferry?
When we do a survey each year, we do look at the...
So talk to me about what that breakdown looks like.
Sure, so when we look throughout the system, pardon me, 35? It's about 35% of our riders identify as non-white. There are higher percentages of non-white riders.
Why do you think that's the case? If you're looking at these numbers, because then if we're doing a study, then we're doing a survey. What are we doing for? Why do we think that's the case?
Well, one of the things that we've seen is that, in fact, we have a greater proportion of riders who identify as non-white for our most consistent routes. So places like Soundview and Ferry Point Park, where we've seen increased diversity, we've also seen a more committed ridership base. That has been one of the things that we've...
But some of it is the narrative is that people of color shouldn't be on here because you're not putting them in their communities. And maybe you don't know that that's not intentionally happening, but even when I've had conversation with residents in there, they were like, yeah, that's not for us because that is the narrative that you're creating. And so I'm just a little bit frustrated because in my district, in High Bridge, where we do have a waterfront, but we don't have access to it, and there is no other options because we have the bus, which is the 13th, that's really terrible, and it's I think it's like 8 buses on that route, which always get stuck in traffic. And then they say, oh, ride city bikes. And if you've ever been to High Bridge, you're not riding a city bike. You got to be committed. So having a ferry is a real life option for a lot of these residents who are often stranded there, who have to either drive and there's no parking, or they have to take an Uber because it's a 2-fare zone. And so thinking about this could be a real option for people to have real transportation, and it's not even being considered. And we have places where there's actually options for them and they could get access, and we're putting additional ferry landings there. Like, I think that we have to get real about what's happening here, because I feel like I've been here for 2 years and I've gotten things where I've said, hey, we would love to have a ferry in the West Bronx, and there's actually a landing that you could put there, and it's not in my district, it's actually in Deputy Speaker's Ayala district that's there, that could be put there because it was put there in the 80s, and it could be done, and it's just not happening. And so I'm really confused, and so that's why I'm asking these questions, because people in my district deserve this. We don't have other options, and this needs to have a real consideration. And so even with the Yankees being there, we would actually probably bring in more revenue than a lot of your other ferries, just because we have so many people that come into this district. So I'm just a little frustrated at this point.
Yeah, and Councilmember Stevens, I definitely hear your frustration, and we at EDC, I never want any New Yorker to think that the ferry is not an option for them, okay? That's not.
My district, it is not.
And I understand that there's not a ferry landing there now, but I would.
There's not even a consideration for it.
I would say that we are really committed to equity and diversity of our ridership, and I know that we can do better.
I don't want diversity and equity and ridership. I want equity and diversity in where they are being located. So there's a difference, and so I want us to make sure that we're not playing word semantics and we're being clear about what we're saying, because it's not about just having diversity of ridership. It's about where you're putting them. That will create the diversity that you're looking for. So we have to make sure that when we're thinking about where these studies are happening and what we're doing, that we're being intentional about not leaving out communities like mine. Because the reality is, there is no subway line being expanded in the High Bridges. It ain't happening. There's no other forms of transportation. Maybe we can get another bus line, maybe, right? But the reality is, this is a real thing that could help people in this community, and thinking about what that looks like. And I feel like this has to have a real look on it, because you will never increase the diversity of your ridership if you're not increasing the diversity of where these ferry landings are.
And Councilmember, I definitely hear you on also looking at the diversity of where ferry landings are. We take that seriously. If and when we would decide to do system expansion, I can assure you that that will be one of our top priorities in looking at where new landings are stood up. And so I hear you, and I hear the needs of your constituents.
We need to see action. So definitely want to continue to have this conversation of what this looks like, because the Harlem River Working Group has been one of the groups that have been pushing really hard for this for years, about having access to their waterfront, and the fact that we have Manhattan having 7 landings, Brooklyn having over 6 landings, and in the Bronx, where are we at? 2? 1? 2. We have 2. And that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. The people of the Bronx deserve better.
And we're happy to connect with you and your office and continue to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, folks, for testifying on both of our behalf. We appreciate you coming today, ready to answer questions and look confidently at what we already are doing for the city, but also on the more expansive side of where we need to work on some of the challenges presented, that members presented, and both that we know are occurring with constituency. With that, you folks are good to go for today. We are now opening the hearing up for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the hearing. Hi, folks, still a government proceeding. If you'd like to chat, please go out into the stairway. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topic, the New York City ferry system. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov or amended testimony from today within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. I will now call up the first panel. Dominic Recchia, our former council member, please come on down. Former council member Robert Cornegie, Tyler Taba, and Sean Campion. You don't need to give direction to the former council members, but whenever you're ready to begin, you can.
Good afternoon. It feels good to be back home. My name is Dominic M. Recchia Jr. I'm former councilman for Coney Island and the former finance chairman of this wonderful institution. And I'm here today to talk about accessibility to Coney Island for a ferry that is greatly needed. Back in 2009, when we did the rezoning in Coney Island, there was points of agreement. I gave a copy for each member. Inside the points of agreement, there's the whole area dealing with ferry. And it clearly states that the city commits to undertaking a ferry feasibility study for Coney Island within 3 years from the date of the rezoning. Unfortunately, Sandy hit, and we never did the ferry study. As of today, as I sit here today, there has never been a ferry study for Coney Island. And the reason why there had to be a ferry study for Coney Island, because it was very difficult, and there was a discrepancy during the rezoning whether to put it on the creek or the ocean side. People in EDC wanted the creek. People in the Bloomberg administration at City Hall, they didn't all agree with that. And the city council, we had documentation that it could be put on the ocean side. And it was never done. So they called for an in-depth study that was going to take at least a year to do. It was never done. What the city did in 2018-19, they did a full ferry study where they talk a little bit about Coney Island, but they give no data. They give no background. They don't say who they're experts in. The same problem with the wave titles and the wind, that's what they said back then, but we had data in the city council because our environmental committee had the research to show that they were wrong, okay? And today, as it puzzles me when they could come up here and read into their testimony that in 2022, we conducted a feasibility analysis to assess other landing options to serve Coney Island, which is incorrect. No one asked them, where is that study? If they had that study, it showed it was no good, they would have said, here it is. You know what the study was? It was all about hold on, I'll tell you exactly what that study was about. I pulled it up on my, hold on one second, I had it right here. Right? It was about a feasibility study all about Hurricane Sandy and the way the winds and the tide destroyed Coney Island. That's what it was about. There's never been a study done, and this must stop. The administration, EDC, must keep their word. I give you the ammunition to show that there was an agreement to say that there must be a study done immediately to see where we could put ferry service, how we could put it, and if we can't, where's the documentation and who are the consultants? Where's the names? So forth.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We will definitely work through the stock of pile of paperwork you just put in front of us, but I appreciate getting the study.
And if any committee, if you analysts and attorneys or anyone want to meet with me, I have tons of data, tons of documentation to help out.
No, thank you for providing that historical context of what took place, because as I mentioned earlier, I visited the area and wanted to understand how EDC moved forward on building a landing that was then found to be an issue locally. So just to be clear, one, we know you support the study, but do you feel that the ferry landing should not be on the ocean side or should be on the ocean side?
It has to be on the ocean side. That's the only place. We used to have ferries in the 1950s, 1960s. We had ferries. You're going to say 2024, we can't build a ferry? We can't build a landing? We have a Steeplechase Pier that we used to have ferries landing all the time. But they never, the other thing, it cost them $12 million when they tried to build inside the creek. They didn't tell you that today. And the community was so upset. What did they do? In the middle of the night in October, they came and dismantled the pier that they built and took it out on tugboats in the middle of the night. That's how upset, that's how they knew they were wrong. But they didn't tell you they wasted $12 million, and $250,000 is not what it's going to cost.
No, thank you for that. And that's actually what I heard when I did my transportation and infrastructure tour. So, like I said, it is good to have on the record the historical context about what took place so that we know moving forward with any type of ferry expansions, we need to make sure that EDC is doing their due diligence in a real way. So thank you for that.
Good afternoon. I just want to start by saying it's not wasted on me, the amount of work and thoughtful deliberation that was necessary to put this hearing together. I want to thank the co-chairs for allowing me to testify today, and it is good to be back home on this side of the table. So I just, obviously I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague who was front and center during this period, but I do want to add that it's undeniable that New York City Ferry is popular form of transportation across the New York City year-round, and the popularity of this form of transportation shows no signs of slowing down. Just in the first quarter of 2024, the coldest time of the year, New York Ferry ridership hit a record high with just over 1 million riders. This number increases dramatically in the summer. Just July 24 alone brought New York City Ferry ridership up to 1.729. In the past 5 years, New York City Ferry ridership has increased by 8% and has surpassed pre-pandemic levels, whereas subway ridership is still at only 67% of pre-pandemic levels. This continued growing popularity is no surprise, given that ferries have become more accessible to New York City residents, providing routes between boroughs at the same cost as the subway and providing an arguably more enjoyable ride than subways and buses. And yet, despite being on the way to the Rockaway stop, Coney Island, one of the most overlooked communities in New York City, gets passed by. A ferry stop in Coney Island just makes sense. This is an area that becomes heavily populated in the summer. An additional form of public transportation would benefit visitors and residents alike. Based on a ferry feasibility study conducted by EDC, it was concluded that a ferry stop in Coney Island would both serve a significant transportation population and reduce commuting time. A ferry route connecting Coney Island to Lower Manhattan would carry an additional ridership of approximately 400,000 riders. By ferry, travel time to Manhattan would be between 25 to 35 minutes. By subway, the transit time is closer to 50 minutes to an hour. While the city has stated its intention to have a Coney Island ferry for decades, no one has been able to make it happen. It's our hope that this legislation will bring back to Coney Island the ferry stop that needs and it deserves. I just want to mention also that there was a time in this city's history where the only way you could get to Coney Island was by ferry.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good morning. I'm Sean Campion. I'm Director of Housing and Economic Development Studies at the Citizens Budget Commission. Thank you, chairs, for the opportunity to testify. So our full testimony, which is submitted online, has a new analysis from CBC on New York City Ferry's finances and EDC's finances and the improvements and shortcomings of the system. So I'll just give a few highlights. When the Ferry Forward Plan was first proposed, CBC testified before the council that its success should be evaluated based on whether and how much a subsidy per ride in total would be reduced. And in its first year, for which we have data, it's clear that Ferry Forward has steered New York City Ferry's finances in the right direction. As we heard today, EDC reduced the ferry subsidy both per ride and in total, thanks to fare increases, more efficient operations. And importantly, it didn't decrease ridership. The fact they hit record ridership levels, even accounting for the addition of new routes. And also worth noting that it allowed EDC to balance its 2023 budget and start replenishing its reserves after having to draw down on those even before the pandemic. And we appreciate these successes. But while Ferry Forward has provided an effective course correction, the financial outlook isn't as buoyant as it may appear. And the ferry remains one of the most heavily subsidized transit options in the city, and its $56 million subsidy still diverts substantial resources from EDC's core mission of advancing the city's economy and promoting economic development. Accordingly, CBC still recommends a higher fare from the non-commuting rides, potentially matching the MTA Express bus service, which is $7 a fare, to offset some of the high operating costs and free up funds for EDC. And it's also worth noting, too, that the official subsidy figure doesn't include city expenditures on debt service for New York City Ferry capital costs, which add about almost $4 a trip, which would make the full subsidy ride about $12.50. If debt service is on its budget, debt service would be about 25% of its operating costs, which would be considered to be an unaffordable amount. And finally, I just want to say that in line with CBC's recommendations to the Charter Revision Commission, we believe that the council shouldn't debate legislation to expand it without a full fiscal impact statement that looks at the impacts of the costs both on the city's operating capital budgets and on EDC's budgets, and how to accommodate those costs within both their financial plans. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, co-chairs, for hosting this hearing and for the opportunity to testify. My name is Tyler Taba. I'm the Director of Resilience at the Waterfront Alliance. Before the reestablishment of the New York City Ferry in 2017, Waterfront Alliance wrote the plan and guide for how to bring back the 5-borough ferry system, and we are a major supporter of the New York City Ferry and continue to encourage the city to envision the ferry as part of its climate, its transportation, and its economic development goals. Our long testimony today is focused on what Waterfront Alliance considers the keys to success for the New York City Ferry, which we refer to as the 5 E's: expansion, economics, electrification, emergency services, and equity. We also support Intro 321, 864, and Resolution 400 on the legislative calendar. Our testimony indicates our strong support for ferry expansion across the 5 boroughs, including the sites under legislative consideration, as well as areas without active legislation. Starting with expansion, we envision several new routes that would serve New Yorkers with newer, greener, and faster transit options that would reshape transportation in the region. Ferries often provide an opportunity to reach neighborhoods in transit deserts, and many of the new ferry landings have reached those communities facing this challenge. The successful expansion projects serve as indications of success that New York City should capitalize on, and Waterfront Alliance again supports widespread expansion with priority to the following sites: Brooklyn to Staten Island via the Bay Ridge Line, City Island via the Soundview Line, and LaGuardia via the Soundview Line and a connection at East 90th Street. We also consider other expansions that are listed in the testimony. There's more information about all of those for the council to review. Next, we talk about subsidies and how they provide, and how these subsidies for the ferries provide value for people. We actually feel that the New York City Ferry is often under unfair criticism of the subsidy that comes with its operation. The ferry last year served 7 million New Yorkers, and we actually feel that comparing the ferry subsidies to a bus or train subsidy is misleading and misguiding. Instead, we should actually look at other ferry services across the country, and if you compare the New York City Ferry to ferry services in Seattle, Boston, New Orleans, and San Francisco, the NYC Ferry's operation expenses per revenue hour are actually much lower. So we go on in our testimony to talk about electrification of the ferry. The ferry is providing emergency services and transportation in the event of extreme weather, and equity in all forms. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We will review your full testimony. I appreciate
it.
that.
Thank
you all folks for testifying today.
I would just like to, on the record, apologize to everyone. I held to a tight 2-minute schedule when I sat on the other side of the table.
You know,
2 minutes goes faster than you ever expected, so I apologize.
This is the first time you are in front of me, and I was ready to cut you off. You are now taking more time, so thank you so much. I will call the next panel. J. Fred Rodriguez Jr., Linda Barron, Rose Yuskanowski. Pardon that pronunciation if it's incorrect. Rashenda Kramer. Whomever is ready to begin.
Says good morning, but good afternoon. I'm Linda Barron. I'm the president of the Staten Island Chamber of Commerce. We have about 14,000 businesses that we represent on Staten Island. We're one of the largest business organizations there. New York City's ferry system and the need for its expansion is a significant topic for our borough's future. Staten Island has long struggled with limited transportation options and some of the longest commutes in the nation. Our residents primarily use their cars. They take express buses. We're not connected to the subway system, so we don't have access to the subway. And we do have a fast ferry. We actually were omitted initially, and then in 2021 in the summer, they put a fast ferry right next to the Staten Island ferry in Staten Island. I'm here today really calling for expansion of the service because we have no connection. If you look at if you go up to the map, you'll look at it, it goes to the west side of Manhattan, so it goes to Battery Park City and it goes to Midtown, west side. But when you look at the other side of the map, that's where all of the other routes exist. So we have no connection. We'd like to see those dots connected. Primarily, we'd like to see a connection to Brooklyn. We share a lot of commerce with Brooklyn. Myself and Randy Pierce, who is the president of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, really see an opportunity for growth for businesses on both sides of each borough. One of the other things is that most people that are traveling are taking the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge. It's just typically backed up in the morning, and so is the Gowanus. So this would relieve some of that congestion. We talk about congestion pricing. This would be a great opportunity to do that. I know it's not in the plan. I know that Staten Island was looked at a number of years ago when Jimmy Otter was our borough president, and they EDC toured it, but we would like for them to revisit this specifically for Staten Island. Again, with the implementation of congestion pricing looming, it's more important now than ever to have equitable transit solutions. And as I said, I can't reiterate it enough, most people don't understand what we deal with on Staten Island. It takes a really long time to get different places. And, when you have to travel to Queens and you get in your car in the morning, it takes you 2.5 hours to get there. It's really frustrating. So thank you for your time.
I appreciate the perspective you bring. I spent a lot of weekends growing up traveling to see my aunt while growing up in Staten Island. When you could put the cars on the ferry is how long ago.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, but thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Rosie Shanowski, and you did quite well on my last name, so I applaud you. It's not easy. I'm going to go a little bit off script, if that's all right. I am the Staten Island and South Brooklyn organizer with Transportation Alternatives, and I am also a lifelong Staten Island resident. I am also going to speak to connecting Staten Island's disconnected ferry service to the rest of New York City. I believe that Althea Stevens spoke very well when she was talking about who our New York City ferry system serves, who it doesn't, and what message that sends. When you have a mass transit system that serves those who already have the most access, the best, then I don't think it's a mass transit system. I think it's a subsidy for the wealthy. I think that's what it was from the start, and the New York City ferry system is getting better, but that's what it still is. It's a subsidy for the wealthy. Staten Island's North Shore has, again, some of the longest commutes in the nation. And people think that Staten Island is a car borough. That's because we're forced to be. It's not because we choose to be. We need more options. We need more access. Don't even talk to me about City Bike. But there is an obvious way to relieve our transit issues. We are an island. We used to have ferries going up and down our coastline. And this is also something that I know Vecchia was speaking to. If we could connect New York City by ferries in the 1950s, then saying that we can't do it today seems a bit backwards.
You can turn.
My name is Fred Rodriguez. I'm a maritime historian, proud U.S. merchant mariner for 31 years, and a veteran of the Staten Island Ferry for 8.5 years. Our city was built on the ferry system. In 1885, Staten Island was building 86% of all the ferries in the tri-state area. Today, there are only 2 lines who remain from that. Staten Island Ferry and the Governor's Island Ferry. So we need more ferries to run people around the 5 boroughs, around to Jersey, all over. We can even try for a run up to Connecticut. We were built by the ferry system, and it would be nice to see NYC Ferry revitalize the run from Staten Island to Brooklyn, where they had 6 diesel electric car vehicles that were operating for many, many years until we built a bridge from Brooklyn to Staten Island. The following year, those 6 ferries went out of business. 2 of them continued with the Governor's Island Ferry. 1 operated and 1 was for spare parts. Thank you for riding the Staten Island Ferry.
And don't forget to turn around.
I say that because in the fall of '89, while I was employed down there, I brought that statement down there, and they made it law. Thank you.
Thank you folks so much for testifying today. Questions?
Thank you.
And I'd like to call up the next panel, John Doyle, Jack Epter, Marie Merville Shazada, Anthony Batista, and Michael Harwood. Oh, we might be. Sorry, Michael, do you mind waiting for the next panel? Okay.
My name is Jack Epter, resident of the Rockaways for 30 years, also on the community board and Edgemere Civic Association. I'm also a sailor, so with regard, I was going to speak on a couple different issues. I just want to correct a couple facts or statements that were made that I heard before. The ferry on the route from the city to the Rockaways doesn't go within 20 to 30 feet of the dock in Coney Island. It's more like a half a mile. That's number one. With regards to the ferry going too fast, I think that's one of the major advantages of the ferry, as far as it creating a wake, because its proximity to the Rockaway Peninsula is too close. I invite anyone to join me on my sailboat any weekend, and I'll show you that the ferry is not creating the wake. It's the big fishing boats going as fast. Okay. A number that wasn't mentioned, with regards to the South Channel Bridge, the maximum height of any boat passing under the bridge, allowing for high tides, maximum high tides during the month, is 21 feet. That wasn't mentioned. The ferry, I believe it's a 300 capacity ferry that goes out to the Rockaways. Currently, I asked the captain what the height from the waterline was. He said he would check and get back to me. He hasn't. I estimate it to be somewhere in the order of, from the waterline to the top of the Furuno sonar is at least 28 feet. So that gives you an idea of the size of the boat that would be required to get underneath the bridge. In terms of, most importantly, 16 weeks we're not going to have subway service because this winter, starting in January. We need expanded ferry service. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I just had a follow-up question for you, Mr. Epter. So in the part of the peninsula that you reside is quickly growing, right, with housing developments, right? In the eastern part of the peninsula. What is the transportation? Like, I know you alluded to the A train that's going to be shut down for 18 weeks for the entire, almost the entire peninsula. So how do you get around to get off of the peninsula?
Well, unfortunately, we're going to find out in January, which most people don't even realize. It's going to be 16 solid weeks. We need expanded ferry service. It's going to involve buses taking people either to, it hasn't been decided definitively at this point, either taking people from the ends of the peninsula to either Howard Beach or Rockaway Boulevard. We're pushing for Rockaway Boulevard, but apparently MTA is leaning more towards bus service to Howard Beach.
And outside of the 18-week period that we won't have the access to the A train, just even right now, what modes of transportation is available for residents in Edgemere, for example?
Thank you for asking the question, because the subsidy that is given to the people on the average, I learned today, earning over $100,000 who primarily reside on the western end of the peninsula is nothing short of outrageous. So we definitely need additional services on Edgemere. As an aside, well, I have the map of the bay. There's only one place that any kind of boat could dock that would assist the Edgemere community, and that's 59th Street. But unfortunately, there's a marina there. But anywhere else, the combination of dredging and shallow water, no bulkhead, nowhere else east of 86th Street is in any way feasible. So I had proposed extending the 52 bus by 5 blocks. It's a very small step, but in terms of feasibility, it exists. So I think that that's a very small step to assist specifically people in Edgemere. Instead of having to walk 10 blocks or 20 blocks, knock 5 blocks off of it. Wouldn't cost Transit Authority anything. So that's my answer.
No, thank you for that. And I know you and I have had a couple of spirited conversations around it, and it's my hope that the study will let us know what all is possible in terms of building and what that potential could be, thinking innovatively. But thank you for coming all the way from Rockaway to be able to testify today. I appreciate it.
I would hope that, that the panel gets a copy of a
oh yeah, if you
maritime
leave
map.
a copy, we'll get it. Yeah.
If you want to make a copy of this one, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, we'll check it out. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, chairs. My name is John Doyle, and I'm a resident of City Island. Over the past few years, I've been working as part of the community-based non-for-profit City Island Rising to advocate for an expansion of the NYC ferry route to include a City Island terminal along the Soundview route. There are many positives for such a route. It would help reduce traffic congestion, which can be legendary on a summer weekend season. It can also help give much-needed foot traffic to our commercial strip, which there are many chronic storefront vacancies, and many businesses, some of whom you're going to hear from today, struggle to keep customers during the off-season. And most importantly for the residents, hundreds of whom work in Manhattan and Brooklyn, it would cut commute times almost in half. That's truly transformative for many families who can spend up to 3 hours commuting via bus and subway into the city each day. Moreover, while I understand a study was done 5 years ago, I'd ask you to keep these few important factors relative to the community. One, peak travel time to City Island is on weekends, not weekdays, when the study was measuring the community. And two, this is a blue-collar community with many folks working in the construction trades, hospitality industry, and first responders working non-traditional hours. Thus, they might not have been captured in the previous study. While we are not traffic experts, we have over 2,000 signatures and many in hard copy form on City Island and the surrounding communities who would support such a transit proposal. Additionally, with climate change concerns mounting and the specter of some of the congestion pricing on the horizon, the city should act now, not later, to provide residents with an economical form of transportation into Manhattan and the surrounding boroughs. Finally, I would ask you to remember that the Bronx, despite having only one of two terminals, kept nearly 90% of its ridership during the pandemic, while the whole ridership fell by almost 70%. Clearly, there's a pent-up demand through the borough. Let's seize this opportunity. I hope you will take all of this into consideration for future planning. Thank you for your time, and I have 2 editorials I wrote for your consideration.
Thank you for being so timely. You can continue.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marie Merville-Shazada. I'm a community organizer. I'm also the executive director of El Fadila Community Services, which is a nonprofit throughout the city, but primarily we work out of Coney Island, Brooklyn. I do want you guys to know that I am in favor of a ferry in Coney Island. The residents of Coney Island are isolated from the rest of the boroughs and the surrounding areas. The MTA bus system is slow and infrequent. We have 2 lanes, and the MTA has proposed to close out 1 lane, so that makes it even worse. During events in Coney Island, I don't know if you guys come out during 4th of July, there's a standstill of traffic for about 2 to 3 hours. Coney Island needs extra modes of transportation, as other people have said. What we are hoping is that if you guys do allow Coney Island to have a ferry service, it would transform Coney Island, which is socially, economically a desert right now, to change it and transform it in ways that has transformed Red Hook with the ferry system. Now, I'm very jealous of Far Rockaway, which we do service Far Rockaway. We need something very much as the rocket that we've heard of, the rocket ferry. At least you guys have it. We have nothing. If you guys could bring it, we would appreciate it. I leave you with these words from the famous movie, Fields of Dreams: if you build it, they will come. So please, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Batiste. I'm also a community organizer and advocate for Coney Island. I'm the executive director for the Coney Island Anti-Violence Collaborative as well. You know, the city around 2012, they came out and they promised Coney Island a ferry. The EDC came out and they themselves realized that Coney Island is a little over 1.5 miles for the only train station, Stillwell. So with that being said, during seasonal times, the traffic, we're gridlocked. You know, I know Marie, she mentioned a couple of hours, that's for 4th of July, but on a regular summer day, it's taken me to drive out 1 hour and 8 to 1 hour and 15 minutes just to get out of the peninsula, just to hit the Bell Parkway. That's absurd. You know, in 2018, the EDC, they did come out, they started doing the ferry in Kaiser Park. The residents were telling everyone when they started dredging, when they started digging, that they were getting dizzy. They found out that there was toxins coming in the air, so they halted. It was a waste of money for the city, but the residents were telling them not to do it. They were telling them the moment they started drilling, they weren't feeling well. No one listened until finally they got fined, and then they realized they made a mistake. We deserve a ferry. You know, the 1 hour and 8 minutes in the summertime is just ridiculous. Over 1.5 miles for someone to go from Seagate to Stillwell. We can't rely on the buses. They're trying to take away buses. They're trying to close bus lanes. How else is anybody going to be able to travel? It took me to drive here. It took 1 hour and 25 minutes to drive. The train would be 1 hour and 32 minutes just to get here. I put it in my GPS. You know, it'll cut about 30 to 45 minutes, the ferry, just to get to the city. You know, a parent that has to get to work, 1 hour and 30 minutes, you can't work. You know, you have to drop off your kids in school 7:30 to 8 o'clock. From 8 o'clock, what job is going to hire you from 9 to 12:30 to be able to you can't work if you have children. So we desperately need this ferry.
I appreciate for you folks from Coney Island and from City Island and Rockaways coming to contribute to this conversation. I think a lot of times, especially when we're looking at an area like City Island in the Bronx or even Coney Island or Rockaway for the beach, we're seen as seasonal spots where people want to go, versus the reality of it is our communities are interconnected, and there are people residing there every single day and need reliable options as New Yorkers. So I'm hoping through this hearing, the bills that are presented, future bills to come, and the conversations that will continue on with the EDC, that we're able to foster some real solutions for our community. So we're just really appreciative of you folks coming out.
Thank you.
And driving the hour and 30 minutes. I feel that pain as a Bronxite sometimes. Thank you, folks. I'd like to call the last two folks in person. We have some virtual folks still awaiting. Michael Harwood and Mr. Stein, Alex Stein, now that I'm looking at it, Alex Stein. Just a reminder, Mr. Stein, you're not allowed to do any audio visual recordings during the hearing. No, it is already a pre-recorded hearing, and so that is the, would you like me to read the, that is the rule, that you are not allowed to record. So I'll read it again for folks that are still waiting, even virtually. Members of the public, it's a formal government proceeding. That's a quorum shall be observed at all times. Members of the public shall remain silent who are not testifying. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public shall not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. Would you like to go first? Thank you.
Yes, my name is Michael Harwood. I'm a resident of the North Shore of Staten Island for over 30 years and a member of the St. George Civic Association and the association's, oops, I'm not on. Oh, okay. Okay, St. George Civic Association and its Ferry Riders Committee. As pleased as I am to have the New York City ferry service between Staten Island and Manhattan, I fear it is doomed to failure because EDC and Hornblower have not learned from history, and they do not listen to the riders who are best positioned to advise on how to make the service better and more user-friendly, as evidenced by the fact that they've left the room. Back in the 1990s, we had a fast ferry from St. George to Midtown East, which filled a gap for connectivity to the east side. The service was well used from the beginning until someone decided to change the contract to a new provider on the west side of Manhattan, which basically duplicated the Staten Island Ferry and the number 1 train. It also had, it was not weather protected at the terminals, and there were no services on the boats. It ultimately failed because of lack of interest in ridership. Once again, thanks to EDC, we have a single line ferry to the west side with no connectivity to the rest of the system, whether Brooklyn or the east side of Manhattan. My colleagues have spoken to the need for service to Brooklyn from Staten Island, but the EDC has told us they have no plans to expand the service, even though on Staten Island the docks exist between Staten Island and Brooklyn, and there would be no infrastructure costs whatsoever to expand service there. When New York City Ferry has added summer service to the Rockaways, it did so for Brooklyn and Queens, but not Staten Island, which has no form of mass transportation to get to the beaches and Rockaways. And to add insult, which just shows that EDC is selective and dismissive of Staten Island when they decide where to expand service. And then to add insult to injury, they have made clear it will do nothing to respond to our requests to connect the easy mistakes in the system. We have asked them to add service of Wi-Fi on the Staten Island ferry boat, on the NYC ferry boats from Staten Island. They said, wait, we'll see in the future. We have asked them to protect the ticket booth, which is open to the rain and weather, so that people can buy tickets. They've said, no, we will not do that. We have no plans to do that. The ferry dock is open to wind blowing from the sides. They said, we're not going to put up any tarps to help you. They will not do anything, and they're setting up this route for failure, it seems, to try to reduce ridership so they can cancel it. And either it's that or it's just indifference and incompetence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alex Stein. I'm here in New York City, all the way from Dallas, Texas, on the 23rd anniversary of the terror attacks that happened on September 11th, 2001.
So
these buildings were owned by
this
the
hearing
Port.
is
It's
solely
about the
focused
Port
on
Authority,
the
Amanda.
NYC
Amanda, it's about
ferry?
the Port Authority. Do not try to shut me down. Now, on the
I'm
23rd
not. You can
anniversary,
continue
the
on
Port.
to talk about the Port
Yeah, I am
Authority.
talking about the Port Authority. The Port Authority owned these buildings. They sold them to Larry Silverstein for a very cheap price. If you look into Tower 7, it looked like a controlled demolition. University of Alaska at Fairbanks did a study on this, and they said that the way that these buildings fell looked clearly like a controlled demolition. So we need to look into the Port Authority on why they were able to sell these buildings so cheaply. Now, if you do
Does
some
have anything
research,
to do with the
if you do some
NYC
research
ferry
into
and
the Port
Authority
Authority,
stop?
let me talk about the Port Authority. If you do some research into these towers, they had irreparable asbestos. Not only were they basically totaled because the price to fix this asbestos made the buildings worthless.
Mr. Stein, I'd like to reiterate that while you are talking about the Port Authority,
Yes,
this
I
is-
am. Quit shutting me down. Are you going to stop the clock?
is connected
I'm here.
to
No, I'm
the
here to bring up
NYC
9/11
ferry.
truth, and you're trying to stop me because you don't like this.
No,
Listen,
I want you to
guys,
be
are you the same
connected
person that said
to
the
the
EPA?
NYC ferries development and its
listen,
ticketing system?
So, hey, are the
Would
ferries
you
under
like
the
to
Port
talk about
Authority's
the Port Authority
jurisdiction?
and the possibility
Let me
of
just
it
tell you
being
this.
an NYC
Listen,
ferry
you're trying to
stop?
hide the truth. If you look into 9/11, you guys lied. You said the air was okay. The
We can
EPA
mute
said the
his
air was
mic and-
fine on September 11th, and all those
Mr.
firefighters
Stein,
that got
once
cancer
again,
and
we
died.
can
What do you care
continue
about
to yell.
them? What do you think about
remove
them?
him
What do you
from
think about all the people?
Listen,
No,
this
it's not
solely
my
is so
time.
focused on the NYC ferry system. You can remove him from the chamber. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael, for coming to testify. We'll now move on to virtual testimony. I would like to acknowledge and recognize Wayne Richards to speak.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good afternoon. Okay, I was asked to do a testimony in reference to the infrastructure. I thought that the infrastructure had to do it overall, but I see that you're narrowing it down. You're narrowing it down to just the transportation portion as far as the ferry is concerned.
So what I can clarify for you is this hearing is focused on the New York City ferry. The infrastructure component can be the potentiality of the expansion of ferry landings throughout New York City. And so if you'd like to testify in regards to any of the current ferry stops, the challenges or successes of those ferry landings and ferry operations, and or the potentiality of the expansion of the infrastructure of ferry landings, you may do so now.
Okay, so I did an overall design concept in reference to infrastructure for the overall peninsula. Included in the infrastructure design concept, I included the water taxi. And so it is part of the design concept that I prepared. Sylvina's staff, Julian, has that information, and I guess if he wants to upload it, or you guys can get it from Sylvina. But the design concept has to do with, creating a promenade, but within that promenade also we want to create a water taxi able to stop along the peninsula. It's something that's highly needed, and basically what we're looking for, communities asking that the investment that was put on the beach side, we would like to now take the investment, possibly do an investment to do it on the bay side. And so developing the bay side is a major infrastructure portion for this peninsula because we deal with high flooding issues and things of that nature. And we're trying to come up with all different ways to resolve those, and working with the Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera. So as far as this is just a design concept, but my thing was to get the ferry because it's going to highly need it. We've now increased, we have at least, I want to say, maybe 10,000 new units just came into Far Rockaway, okay, on the peninsula alone. So the bus service, the train service is not going to be enough. We need two means of egress and other ways of transportation, and having the water taxi service coming all the way down, even into Inwood, because it would allow Manhattan to actually come all the way into Far Rockaway, the peninsula, and come all the way down to Rockaway Turnpike Boulevard, next to the IHOP, if you will, was the last stop, but it'll be another shopping area. so people can actually come to our area and enjoy the things that we have here, just not the beaches. We have a whole lot happening in Far Rockaway and on the peninsula. And we would like to have the access so that people can use it, because what currently what we do have is insufficient. Obviously, we know about the trains, obviously we know about the buses, and you know, even with the volunteer bus service that they have. So if it's even lacking in that. So if, what else can I say is that it's something that we truly need as far as the design concept and as far as getting the water taxis to fit here or work there. I think I spoke to a gentleman from the Army Corps of Engineers when the engineers at, I think Saunders was holding a rally, and I met him there and expressed all those things to him, my concepts. But the idea is there's more than one way to skin a cat, if you will. So those guys that's doing the water taxi, those private owners, there's more than one way. It's just a matter of designing. At this point, that's pretty much my input, but it's something that is truly needed. And in particular, if you're talking about the 21st century of Far Rockaway, this is one of the things that's going to be highly needed. I'd like to thank you at this time for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Mr. Richards. And you touched on something in terms of the businesses that are on the eastern end of the peninsula. Can you speak to some of your observation in terms of, like, if you observe a boom in support for local businesses on the west end, just trying to tie in how the ferry is connected to economic success in many instances with our local small businesses on the peninsula?
Right. So what you do notice is that when the ferry stops off uptown, we call it West Side Uptown, right? You'll notice that the stores, the local store there, they benefit from the incoming summer crowds and incoming businesses, the people that are coming over. They benefit from that because it's there. The ferry's right there. They come out. That's the uptown, downtown, if you will. So all the shopping and everything is there. So the guests that are coming, the visitors that are coming, they're getting to pass the pizza shop, the Jamaican restaurants, the small little clothing stores that we have. So they're benefiting on that end. On the other end, there's no, if we can create certain things, there will be benefits. However, there's no real benefits from the ferry coming to the peninsula. The only area that's really benefiting is the uptown side, which will be the west side.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to call on April Jackson, followed by Susan Hayes and Glenn Velofsky.
I don't want you
Your time has begun.
But at some point you may feel like you're being taken advantage of. And I know what you do for your mom.
April, we can hear you.
Sorry, April Jackson, we're calling you to testify at the hearing.
Your time has begun.
And, you know, I always say to
I'm gonna mute her. I think she's on phone.
Can we mute the constituent and notify her that she's up next? I'll now call on Susan Hayes.
Your time has begun. Your time has begun. She's not on the Zoom. Glenn Belofsky, and that's the only person left.
Great. Glenn Belofsky, if you are ready to testify, you may begin now.
Your time has begun. Glenn, you're unmuted.
I'm unable to provide elevator music, folks. I'm sorry about that. Do we want to give an attempt at April Jackson one more time?
April, your time has begun.
oh, I didn't know. I didn't even know that.
I think she's on another call. Glenn, we'll try you one more time.
Yes.
We can hear you, Glenn. You may begin.
Yes, hi, how are you today? I want to thank the council for this important meeting today, simply because there's not enough done for alternate transportations. When we hear of transportation alternatives, today really is wonderful because it's really presenting so many various options for transportation alternatives that we desperately need here in the city. You know, the ferries are vital for everyone to get around. So I applaud the council today for doing this. And I also want to just say, you know, revenue is needed for all of these important projects. And since revenue is needed, I'd just like to say from a part of infrastructure relating to transportation and parking, which everyone may know is my expertise, that electronic parking signs in Midtown and in high congested areas of downtown Brooklyn and throughout Queens as well can produce tremendous revenue for the city that can help us expand all of our transportation options. So I just want to remind everyone about that. I've been throwing that on the table for a while. Revenue by using electronic parking signs that can be displayed in multiple languages, can be seen from your car, so you don't have to get out in the middle of the night where it might be, you know, a cold night, you know, and a dangerous block. So these kind of things are vital. And I want to thank the council again and the central staff and all the advocates for their help today.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Sorry, folks, we were just waiting on virtual testimony. If we can try to see if April Jackson is unmuted and can testify again. If not, I will be closing off the hearing.
April, you're unmuted.
Your time has begun.
Okay, thank you, folks. With that, I am closing today's hearing at 1:54 p.m. Thank you for all of those folks who came to testify today. Again, for those that were unable to, you have up to 72 hours to submit written testimony to the committee, and have a great day.